Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's event, Total Tax Contribution Report Launch and the Tax and Circular Economy Symposium. My name is Dave Keating. I'm a journalist based here in Brussels. I'm going to be guiding us through the first part of our discussions, which is coming at a really critical time. So the point of today's event is to look at tax trends through the analysis of megatrends. We're going to be asking whether tax systems are still well aligned with societal and economic developments. So we'll be talking about megatrends such as changing demography, circular business models, the uptake of generative AI, and declining multilateralism, and how those megatrends are impacting tax trends. This event is brought to you by the European Business Tax Forum, EBTF, and the X-Tax Project Foundation. And it is coming on the occasion of the launch of the 2025 Total Tax Contribution Study, which is very much tied into looking at these mega trends. This is the 7th edition of the TTC Study, and we're going to have a presentation of the report followed by a panel discussion to talk about both the reports and the megatrends. So without further ado, I'd like to turn the floor over to Mai Trin, who is the EBTF board member and head of tax risk reporting and reputation at RELX.
Thank you very much, Dave. And hello, everyone. On behalf of the European Business Tax Forum and the X-Tax Project Foundation, it is a great pleasure for me to welcome you to today's event. So as Dave said, I am Mai Trin, Head of Tax Risk Reporting and Reputation at RELX, and I'm also a board member of the European Business Tax Forum. I'm coming to you today live from Brussels, right at the heart of the EU Quarter. So it's really lovely to see many of you in Brussels in person today, and many more of you who are joining us online from all over the world. I'm really delighted that we're all here today for this important conversation. So let me set the scene for the session today. So as Dave said, the megatrends such as AI and automation, climate change, demographic shifts may have an impact on the tax system and the tax mix. We will examine how taxes should evolve to foster resilient supply chains and competitive business circular models. And we're privileged here today to host representatives from the European Union, the European Commission, the OECD, and tax leaders from global corporations. So as Dave said, there are two parts of this event. The first part, which runs in the first 90 minutes up to the first break, will cover the Total Tax Contribution Study in the light of megatrends, and that is hosted by the European Business Tax Forum, the EBTF. The second part, the Tax and Circular Economy, will be hosted by the X-Tax Project Foundation. So who is the EBTF? It is a thought leadership group of the largest European multinational companies. Our core mission is responsible tax practices and tax transparency. We are committed to evidence-based dialogue and objective analysis around taxation and businesses. We are not an advocacy or lobby group. We undertake research, publish reports, and inform the public tax debate around business and taxation. And we bring different stakeholders together, which is what we're doing today. We're welcoming interest from other European multinationals who have similar interests to ours and is interested in joining our organization. So please come and speak to us if you are interested. Now, coming up to the first part of the program, so there will be two presentations. One is the Total Tax Contribution Study, which I will present. And then after that, there'll be a presentation from PwC to delve into the megatrends in more details and bring them to life from a European perspective. After that, we're going to have a panel discussion bringing together the different perspectives. So we've got policymakers, the European Union, the OECD, we've got a perspective from think tank, the Tax Project Foundation, and also here from business perspective, so we've got PwC. So it's an honor for me to present the 7th edition of the Total Tax Contribution Study. And so you can see the slides on, they have just now come on. So what is it in a nutshell? Total tax contribution refers to 5 P's of taxes. There are profit taxes, product taxes, property taxes, people taxes, and planet taxes. We have invited largest European multinational companies by revenue and market cap. And when we first started 7 years ago, we had 40 companies, and the study have grown steadily over the years. And this year, we have got a record 80 companies covering more than 160 jurisdictions. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of the companies who have participated in the study, which gives us an opportunity to provide a comprehensive perspective of the fiscal and economic footprint of multinational companies. The study is conducted by PwC, whom we have worked with for many years. We really appreciate all the hard work that PwC have put in to collect a vast amount of data and to provide some really useful insights analysis, and we like to share those with you today. So the big picture is that the total tax contribution of the 80 of the largest companies in Europe is 558 billion euros. So that is a large number, and to put it into perspective, it represents 7.7% of the total tax revenue across all EU member states in 2024. It is made up of taxes borne of 45% and taxes collected of 55%. Now, I want to quickly mention about the distinction between taxes borne and taxes collected. So taxes borne are taxes that are cost to a company and it impacts a company's financial results. Taxes collected are those that companies administer for others and on behalf of governments. So an example is people taxes, employee social security costs would be included within people taxes borne, and employee income taxes, which are administered through payroll, would be included within taxes collected, and together they form part of the total tax contribution. Now, for a number of years, as you know, the focus on multinational companies have been on corporate income tax. What our study shows is that there are a comprehensive picture of all taxes contributed. So for every euro of corporate income tax, there is 90 pence of other business taxes and 228 pence of taxes collected. The 80 companies in our study also generate employment for 5.9 million people and equating to average employment taxes per employee of nearly 21,000 euro. So having conducted the study over 7 years also gives us an opportunity to look at the trends, and we can trace how the composition of the total tax contribution has evolved through the COVID pandemic, the energy shock, and the recovery. You can see on the graph here the total tax contribution dipped in 2020 and 2021 because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the product taxes that you can see in orange have drastically reduced due to the reduction in consumption. Then the economic recovery starts from 2022, and the total tax contribution picks up, including increases in profit taxes, which you can see in turquoise blue, gradually even surpassing the pre-pandemic levels. And this is due to increase in profitability in industries such as financial services, energy, and manufacturing. And these are partially offset by energy cost normalization. So I'm delighted that this year's study also comes up with looking at things from a new angle. And Megatrends is something that is new in our report this year. So the 2025, the external environment this year is defined by volatility and transition. And the megatrends that are discussed in the report, such as climate change, technological disruption, and demographic shifts, these shape the economies, the labor markets, and the global tax landscape. So what I'd like to do is to go through some of the data in the report that set the scene for the megatrends. And there will be more insights into that in the second presentation and the panel. So the first data that is quite interesting is the tax mix. And you can see that with the total tax rates by country. So total tax rates is calculated by taxes borne over profit before tax. So taxes borne, we're only looking at the cost that the taxes the company actually suffers. So the tax collected is not part of the total tax rate. And what you can see here is a spectrum of total tax rates by country. So at one end of the scale, you've got some countries with high total tax rates, above 50%. So there's Canada, France, Mexico, and Belgium. And the other end of the scale with lower tax rate in 22%, that is Switzerland. You can see the different tax mix per the country. So for example, when you look at people taxes, which is in dark blue at the bottom, then you can see countries like France and Belgium would have higher total tax rates in relation to employment taxes. So that means that the future megatrends, so the impact of AI or automation may impact these countries more because they're more heavily reliant on the people taxes. For other countries that have got different tax structures and they draw more from consumption or profit-based levies, then there may be some different type of adjustment. This one looks at total tax contribution by country. So total tax contribution that includes both taxes borne and taxes collected. And I think what's interesting about this graph is perhaps maybe what you don't see so much. So in very light blue is planet taxes. And you can hardly see it because it's a very small proportion of the total tax contribution. In most countries, it's about 1 or 2%, and at most, it's 5% in Spain. Other things that's worth noting is that product taxes account for the largest share of total tax contribution in countries such as Brazil, 35%, Italy, 36%, showing the country's reliance on VAT or other transactions-related taxes. In relation to profit taxes, they account for the largest share of total tax contribution in countries such as Mexico, 45%, that is in turquoise blue, Netherlands, 48%, and Switzerland, also 48%. This one is showing people taxes borne and collected by industry. So you will see in certain industries, like financial services, technology, media, and telecommunications, then the people taxes borne and collected are the highest. So that reflects the high wage costs, but also high employment value in these industries. And in a fragmented world, then the ability to attract and retain talent is becoming increasingly important. And be able to kind of understand more about the people tax profile by different industries would help to understand where the kind of pressure points is highest, and helps to understand how that impacts the total tax rate composition in the future. So on a closing note, we have touched on some of the data points in relation to the tax mix, the planet taxes, people tax profiles, to set the scene for the discussions around megatrends, from AI and automation, redefining the tax mix, to climate transition and demographic shifts. We believe that transparency continues to enhance public confidence and trust in business, supporting social stability. So we would like to invite you all to read the Total Tax Contribution Report, which has now been launched and is available on the website. And we hope that you enjoy the rest of the event. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mai. So now we've heard the Total Tax Contribution Report. Next, we're going to hear about megatrends. I'd like to welcome here to the podium Giorgia Maffini, who is a special advisor on tax policy at PwC.
Dave, and good afternoon, good morning, everyone. In the next 10 minutes, I wanted to take you through some of the trends that Mai has introduced to us and place them in the European economic context first, and then think a little bit about the economic implications of those trends for Europe. And I'll conclude with a couple of thoughts on tax, because of course I have to talk about tax, that I hope those conclusions will be helpful for the panel later on. So in terms of economic context in Europe, so we heard May talking about global trends. Where do those global trends happen if we look at Europe? Okay, so to look at the macro indicators of Europe, we like to start from productivity, because productivity tells us a lot about the efficiency of our economy, but also about the living standards of our population. Because when productivity increases, wages increase, and living standard increase. And we see that there are sort of three groups of countries. A group of countries at the bottom of the slide in yellow. These are the large European economy, France, Italy, and the United Kingdom, which haven't done very well in terms of GDP per capita since the financial crisis. So the productivity has increased, especially after the pandemic, but they are struggling a little bit more than the others. Then we have a group of countries in the middle, the Nordics. Traditionally, despite being high tax countries, they are doing quite well in terms of productivity. And also Germany hasn't done too badly. And then we have countries like the EU and Switzerland. I chose Switzerland because it's a good European example who seem to do very well in terms of productivity. You might not like GDP per capita. It's true, it's not perfect in capturing our living standards. We could look at multi-factor productivity growth, and if we take a simple annual average of the growth rate since 2005, again, the picture is exactly the same, unfortunately. Or fortunately for others who are doing particularly well. So this is one important piece of the puzzle, to think about our well-being for the future and how strong we are in terms of withstanding the trends that are coming. Another important piece of the puzzle is the demographic trends in Europe. We know that Europe is aging, especially in some countries, faster than other peers, but not faster than, for example, Japan or South Korea. So we are not alone in this. What do the numbers say? So if we look at Eurostat latest statistics, we see that the working age population, so between 15 and 16 years old, the projection is that that will fall by about 19% between 2002 and 2100. Okay. The old age dependency ratio, which is very important, so young working people versus older people, is about 1/3 in 2002. It's projected to go to 1/2 in 2050. So a big change there, okay? But I hope I'll give you some good news in the second part of the presentation on these trends. Last important piece of the puzzle, which is very important for tax policy, debt over GDP. Why? Because, of course, debt over GDP places a huge constraint on what tax policy can do. And again, we see here sort of two groups of countries. Some countries, Nordics, Switzerland, have done very well. After the pandemic, they go down below 50% of debt over GDP. Then we have countries like Germany that are placed around 70%. And then we have the three large economies with high debt, but also the US. You see that the trend of the US debt over GDP ratio is increasing. And that's what my colleagues tell me. My colleagues in the US tell me that debt ratio is bound to increase because of the latest measures in the US. So these are, I think, the important data for thinking about tax policy in the future and in the context of the megatrend. If we think instead a little bit about the economic implications of the megatrends that Mai has just described, I'll focus on three. Mainly because I don't want to talk about climate change because I have Kurt in the room, so I don't dare to say anything about that. And many other experts will talk about that in the second part of our event. So I'll focus on essentially technological change and demographic change, because also economics is a bit more helpful there. So if we think about technological disruption, what we all have in mind today is the introduction of AI, of course. And why are we worried about this? Because we are afraid that AI will cause massive job losses, but also for the jobs that remain, that the return to work, so wages in a way, will decrease massively, okay? And this is what we hear a lot, I think, in the news. In reality, if you look at the literature and at the empirical evidence, these are two fears, two questions that we have always had when we have new automation, when we have new waves of technology. And in reality, in history, wages and labor has never been wiped out. Okay, actually, at the beginning of the last century, automation has brought in new jobs and higher wages. Okay, more recently, if you look at the work of Acemoglu, is a Nobel Prize in economics from last year, he has looked at the introduction of AI, not generative AI, AI in the US, and what they find is that there is a reallocation of jobs within the firm, but not a total net loss of jobs in the firms that adopt AI, and wages do not collapse at all. So good news, I think, there. More recent work done in Europe by Spencer Bastani and Walderstorm find actually that the net labor share of national income has remained stable in Europe, and it has actually increased in countries like France, Italy, and the UK. It has decreased, though, in the US, where technological adoption is faster. Okay, so I think if we look at our past and we look at the empirical evidence, there are reasons not to be too pessimistic. Okay, why is that? Because in history, technological change has been a complement to work, so it increases the productivity of work, and therefore wages increase. Of course, it could well be that AI is different this time, and there are reasons to think that the past is not a good guide for what AI does, mainly because AI is what they call a general purpose technology, so generative AI. It means that it has the potential not only to substitute manual tasks, but also creative and more cognitive tasks. But also, it can be applied across many sectors, whilst before, automation is applied to some sectors, not all of them. And finally, also, the third element that could make AI a little bit different is that once you deploy it, it can be scaled up very, very quickly. Okay, so, but I think that if you look again at the literature, at the empirical evidence, the picture is a bit more balanced, or at least we still have very big questions open. Okay, it's not necessarily bad. Again, the other question, thinking about introducing AI in Europe, is Europe different? It's a little bit different, but not that different. It's true that we have been slower at adopting automation, investment in ICT at the beginning of this century, digitalization, but our largest firms, if you look at the data, are there. So technologically, they are where their peers around the world are. Where we struggle a little bit is, of course, because in Europe there are a lot of smaller companies, and their adoption is a bit more difficult. But so the problem of Europe is not access to technology, is more the diffusion and the scale. And again, we can certainly do something about that. It's not destiny in any shape or form. In terms of demographic shifts, we know where we are, and why demography could be a problem for our living standard. Mechanically, if you have less people working, GDP per capita goes down, very mechanically. And the OECD has described that probably this costs us 0.25 percentage point per year in terms of growth of GDP per capita. Of course, innovation, you can understand, with less young worker, there is less dynamism, but again, there seems to be solutions there. So the European Stability Mechanism has calculated that if we can push investment in skills, in R&D, that investment can really cover a drop in productivity because the population is aging. Okay. Finally, also, if we look at productivity, again, we tend to think that our productivity is a bit ham-shaped. We are very productive in the middle of our career, but then we become a bit less productive. But again, there are a lot of studies, including from the OECD, that say that if you train your worker, if you keep your worker healthy, etc., longer in life, those problems can be overcome. So it's a matter of policies, really, or at least there are solutions there. Again, if we look at the work of Acemoglu, he even says that aging of the population could be good because Europe will be forced to automate, and this will bring productivity up. Okay, I really like this message from Acemoglu. So overall, yes, there are challenges, but we also know quite well what some of the solutions could be, or at least there are solutions on the table. And we are not sure that things will turn out as badly as we read on newspapers or on social media every day. Last point that I think it's interesting from the tax perspective on technology and demographic trends is where the two unite. So what we have observed at PwC, we have launched this very big survey that covers about 90% of GDP, where we ask employees, not self-employed, but employees, how do you work? And it's very clear that with respect to 5 years ago, the way we work has completely changed. Now, the least popular form of work is fully in person. So only 5 years ago, we were all fully in person. Today, the most popular is hybrid. Second is fully remote. And third, fully in person. So imagine how this has changed. What happens here? Of course, people start to cross borders. If they can work remotely, they go and work where they want. And it seems in our sample that at least 1 in 5 has been working from abroad with respect to its normal place of work in 2024. So these are huge numbers that we also didn't expect. So, and this means that if technology now allows another part of the tax base, labor, to be a bit more mobile. But again, this is not necessarily bad. Yes, we could lose tax base in Europe, but also if our firms struggle to find talent, for example, because of demographic changes, labor mobility allows you to tap into a much bigger pool of talent, or the other way around. If our citizens don't find the right employer, they could find it because there is more flexibility. So again, risks and opportunities in these big trends. I'll conclude with some thoughts on tax, of course. So what is the role of tax in all of this? So if we want to increase productivity, if we want to raise revenues, but not in a distortive way. And I think there are 3 pillars to think about the role of tax when we look at the economy. The first one is the tax burden. And we know that when we raise taxes, we always distort the economy. But we also know that some countries, we have seen it on the slide, will not be able to reduce taxes because there are budget constraints. Okay, so maybe we can park that topic a little bit. Where I think Europe could really focus at the moment is on raising taxes efficiently. So what does it mean? When we raise €1 of revenues, we'd better spend 10 cents to raise that euro of revenues than 50 cents. Okay? But for those of you who are in tax, you know that at the moment in Europe, we are closer to those 50 cents. I'll give you an example, public CBCR. Public CBCR was introduced, and the idea was that you would, publish your CBCR on the website of your company, say in English or in any other language, and then whoever is interested uses that. It turns out that now, for example, many of my clients need to file a CBCR locally in a jurisdiction in the local language. So does that raise more revenue? No, not at all. It's just complication. I'll finish, Dave, by saying so that I think here we can really do a lot in Europe. And finally, as we will discuss in the panel, of course, these megatrends will change our tax base and what we can do in terms of raising revenues. And I think we'll reflect a little bit more on that. Thank you. Thank you.
Some really interesting figures in there, including that 1 in 5 people are working in another country. That's shocking. I'm also very surprised by that. That has a lot of headache implications for employers, I imagine. We're now going to move on to the panel to discuss both the tax report and the megatrends. I'd like to welcome here to the stage, first of all, Giorgio Maffini, who you already met. Then we have Pasquale Cidico, who is the chair of the Subcommittee on Tax Matters in the European Parliament, an Italian MEP from the Five Star Party. Next, we have Kurt van Dender, who is head of tax policy and statistics at the Center for Tax Policy and Administrations at the OECD. And we have Femke Gruthuis, who is founder and president of the X-Tax Project. Thank you all so much for joining us here today. Now, you will be able to ask your questions to the panelists as well. You can do that by putting them into Slido. I will get them here on my tablet, and I'll put those to the panelists. You can scan the QR code that just came up on the screen, and you can put those Slido questions in, whether you're here in person in the room or you're watching online. put your questions in Slido, and I'll put them to the panelists at the end. So I'd like to go down the line first to get some reactions to both the tax report and the megatrends that we just heard. MEP Tredico, let's go to you first. What are your reactions to what we just heard?
Okay, thank you very much, first of all. I enjoy very much the presentation, both of them. Let me say something concerning the last one, because it was really interesting, giving you this very big picture on where we are going. First of all, we need to start from some facts, numbers. As it was said, technological progress never brought about the failure of jobs, the failure of work. On the contrary, we had an increase of productivity. Actually, we have a theory in the literature, Acemoglu was one of them, it was quoted, that states that basically when you introduce technology, the return will be never decrease, or at least will be stable. Now, what we do have with artificial intelligence is that we can resolve an old issue in the economics theory, which is the following. We live with decreasing return. Think about land. Land has decreasing return. It comes a point when actually, whenever you put more worker, at the end, this worker will produce less of what his salary is. With artificial intelligence, this will never happen because both worker and land, imagine, so capital and labor, will be endowed by higher and higher technology, and this will be infinitive. It's not even any longer a matter of education, of training. It's a matter of generative artificial intelligence, which will be increasing return. And this is a fact, actually. This is what has been always experiencing in the literature. The real challenge here comes with demography. We are today at the peak of our labor force everywhere. By the way, we are very much worried about the lack of the shortage of labor and so on. Today, actually, we have the record, we have the peak of labor force in the labor market ever at world level. So today we have reached actually the peak of people, women and men, working. Despite the fact that we are speaking about artificial intelligence, substitution, and so on and so forth, today we have a massive amount of laborers in the labor market. Because there was an expansion so far, demographically speaking. The projection on demography today is not any longer that it was in the past 40 years. We are going to experience a decline in the demography. This is a fact as well, because it is obvious to say fertility rate is already determined by the women today present in the world. Yeah? So we are experiencing a lower fertility rate. We are experiencing a stock of people which already determine the amount of people will come later. So then the real challenge that we are going to experience actually is how many people we are going to tax in the future. Because as you see in this policy mix of taxation, most of the tax is coming from people tax. Once you do not have any longer people, actually you do have an issue. And the issue is double here. First of all, because in the projection you do not have any longer as many as people as you had so far, because of demography. And second, because actually people are already taxed at the peak. We cannot expect any country, any policymaker, anybody today will expect to say, let's tax more people, because people are already fed up about taxes. So then, combine these two things, you have to understand where to find the same level of tax that will not reduce spending, because we have, at least in Europe, generous welfare state. So we want to keep that amount of expenditure. So then, if you combine the fact that you have less people, and from another side, you combine the fact that actually people are already taxed at the peak, you have to think the change in the economy that can give you some hope where to find some revenue. And the example is the following. Today you have a manufacturer, you have a business which have a worker and firms which complain about taxes and have very little amount of profit actually. out of their business. Imagine any kind of manufacturing business which has average income in Europe of about 40,000 euros. So workers in Europe has 40,000 euros brutto, and then out of that you tax with pension, with contribution, with social transfer, and with income taxes, and in the end people get 20,000 euros net. At the same time, firms complain, rightly, that they pay out of these 40,000 so much of taxes. So there is no room to get anything else, because we already have low, medium wage, and you already have firms which complain about taxation, rightly. So then, where you find some revenue then? Today you do have, actually, because of the combination of what I was telling you before, declining of demography and increasing of artificial intelligence, you do have firms without workers. Basically, you have in proportion, firms which produce high bill, but basically with proportionally very little worker. And our system, basically, tax system, follow people. Wherever there are people, you have labor cost from firms and income tax from people. So our tax system is built on people, and firms as well pay taxes on the basis of the people they employ. This is the breaking point now. We cannot keep our system following people because of the two conditions I told you before, demographic challenge and artificial intelligence. So shifting on revenue, shifting from that paradigm of people and labor cost of firm on the basis of people towards something else, which is the future actually. It's the future where you have firms with huge bill but without worker. So then there is something else that has to be taxed there. I conclude saying that somebody, some 15 years ago, said that we need to tax robot, yeah? And you know what I mean. And he was smart enough to forecast before us what are experiencing we today. If we don't change our tax system structurally and understanding that we need to shift from what has been today so far towards something else, actually we will have a budget constraint much bigger than what we have today.
Thanks for that. Kurt Van Dender, let's turn to you next. What are your reactions to the tax and megatrends presentations we've just heard?
Well, thank you first for two very interesting presentations, reports, and thank you for the invitation. Glad to be back after 2 years. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to offer a couple of remarks based on recent OECD publications on taxation, tax policy statistics. And I hope that by doing that, I will give a slightly different perspective on actually the same realities that the two presentations have been talking about, that way trying to set the stage for a bit more debate. And so there is a presentation actually that I had. It is not as such very elaborate, but it contains the links and some graphs from the publications that I will be speaking about. So hopefully that will induce at least some of you to look at these reports. I'm going to talk about three things. First, revenue statistics. Georgia actually also referred to some of that. After that, I will refer to, I'm going to talk about revenue statistics 2024, the 2025 edition, 9th of December. Then I will talk about corporate tax statistics, which we released last year, and then about effective carbon rates, moving to the climate space a little bit. So I'm going to race through all of that. Much of what is here, we saw in the initial reports. We have a different classification of tax structure. We define tax categories differently. It's PIT, personal income tax, corporate income tax, social security contributions, VAT, other taxes on goods and services, and then other taxes. Here you see some of the things that have been commented on already. So the tax take in the OECD on average is 34%, significantly higher than in other parts of the world. It has increased slightly since 2013. Some comments were made. There's not much room to go even higher on average, is what was said. The tax structure, if you look by region, so OECD versus Asia Pacific versus Africa versus LAC, well, I mean, the differences are clear here in Europe. People taxes, as it was referred to, we rely more on PIT, we rely more on social security contributions than other parts of the world. So that's a clear comparison, which is very much in line with what was said. We now are around, almost a percentage point above 1/3 of revenue raised worth of GDP, slight increase more than other regions. We heard the comments about megatrends, aging one of them, climate change one of them, defense, debt, all of these imply upward pressure on spending. So there is going to be upward pressure, there is going to be an increased demand for tax revenue over time. How to meet it? Well, it's very difficult. We also heard about aging, how it could affect the workforce, how it could affect GDP and growth. What we've done as a complementary indicator is just ask the question, what if we apply the 2060 age structure, more higher age people in the population? What if we apply that to the 2022, to the current tax structure? What would happen to revenues? And the answer is that if you mechanically do that, so you take the future age structure with the current tax structure, that you would raise 1% of GDP less of revenue mechanically. So that's a significant effect in view of the upward spending pressure. So there is indeed something that's going to have to happen to make sure that we can continue raising the revenue that we need. The graph on the left, this is backward looking. Basically what it says is, the dark blue is mostly in the negative range, the dark gray is mostly in the positive range. What it means is that within personal income tax revenue, more of the revenue comes out of capital income and less comes out of labor income. So that's an evolution which has already taken place, which continues to take place. This has to do with the composition of income, not as much with tax policy at this point, is the changes in the structure of income. And dependent on how AI and other trends play out, this may be amplified in the future. I think we heard some contrasting concerns of views from different speakers already on how this might play out. It is clear from where I stand that there's significant concern in the short run, in the transition phase, on what the impact of AI and similar trends, automation, could be on revenues. So that's something that I hear from my constituency, from the OECD member countries. On corporate tax statistics, I'll go quick. What we've seen very recently is an uptick in the share of CIT in total revenue as share of revenue, share of GDP. I think Georgia and others commented on how profits have increased. You see it also on the graph on the right. A larger share of CIT revenues now comes from large M&Es. On the bottom, this is for an OECD person, our favorite graph, of course, we see a stabilization in CIT rates. So no longer this downward trend that we have been witnessing for a long time. It's a bit more stable now. We can discuss why that comes about. It is plausible that things like BEPS measures and the anticipation of the GMT do have an effect here. You can't really establish it at this point, but it's plausible. It's also plausible that what we're talking about here, namely that governments are increasingly confronted with a need to raise revenue, that this plays out here too in a reluctance to keep reducing CIT rates. I mean, this was an observation in our annual tax policy reforms report last year, is that we see an evolution away from using tax to support the economy, more to a stance towards a focus on raising revenue to meet future spending needs a bit more. Effective carbon rates, to take it to the climate space. Now we're in, I think what in the classification here today is planet taxes. Taxes on pollution, taxes on greenhouse gas emissions, taxes on energy use. You may be familiar with our OECD definition here. Effective carbon rates is excise taxes on fuels, carbon taxes, and emission permit prices. We count these together. That's the effective carbon rate. What happens? Well, maybe a little bit surprising, the coverage of emissions by an ETS in practice. It's not carbon taxes. By ETSs, the coverage by emissions trading systems has increased significantly between 2018 and 2023 globally. So there is progress in terms of the coverage. The rates, the marginal rates, the average rates, that's a different story. We can talk about that if there's interest, but coverage is increasing. What we also see though, and this is kind of reflective of what we, I think, are focusing on here today, is that the way these emissions trading systems are being implemented increasingly reflects a combination of policy objectives. It's about climate, it's about affordability, it's also about competitiveness. It's much more obvious today in new ETSs compared to longer existing ones that policymakers have these three objectives in mind when they design these emissions trading systems. So in a sense, that means that environmental taxation, climate, carbon pricing is becoming integrated in mainstream tax policy and public policy, perhaps a little bit more than earlier where it was somewhat separate. So these are some comments. Happy to discuss all of that in more detail. Thank you.
Good, thanks. Let's turn to Femke Grushus next. What are your reactions to the presentations we've just heard?
Right, thank you. So just a little bit about me. The think tank I co-founded, the X-Tax Project Foundation, has been studying the role of tax in addressing some of these megatrends for 16 years now. And looking at what's on the table, we really have to conclude that the tax mix is no longer fit for purpose. The current tax mix in the EU is on average that labor taxes provide 52% of all tax revenues on average, and for employers that means higher labor costs, higher costs of hiring people, and for employees it means they directly reduce net take-home pay. And so whereas labor taxes provide 52% of tax revenues, green taxes only provide 5% of overall tax revenues, and still they are mainly based on energy and mobility, because the taxation of pollution and resources only provides 0.2% of revenues across the EU. And so this means that the tax system is still fully aligned with the linear economy, the take, make, waste economy, which is causing resource supply risks, both physical risks and which is compounded now by geopolitical risks, the climate crisis, and massive health costs, which again requires funds to be raised to serve people with healthcare. So the EU wants to evolve to a more competitive circular economy by 2050. And that means it's a regenerative economy, which is much more resource effective. And so the circular economy is not just about recycling. It is a key strategy to achieve climate neutrality, because the impacts of the way we natural resources are extracted and processed are actually making up over 55% of global greenhouse gas emissions. The circular economy is also a key strategy for a more strategic autonomy and resilient supply chains, because it's an economy with a much higher resource productivity that requires less primary materials and fossil fuel imports, for which we now depend on countries outside of the EU. So as competitiveness will be more and more about doing more with less, the question is, how are we going to evolve to a circular economy? But currently, high labor taxes are a massive barrier for businesses to move in the space of circular business models. Because all circular business models like repair and refurbishment and R&D to develop new materials, recycling, reuse of components from products, they are more labor intensive and or knowledge intensive than the current linear business models. They require time and effort by people, that means that there's no level playing field for circular business models right now. They have a double competitive disadvantage because they need to compete with businesses that do not make an effort to change their ways and clean up their act, and also they need to compete with activities where there is no payment for the pollution, the externalities. And even subsidized. So fossil fuel subsidies, according to the EEA, are still 111 billion euros per year. So, and yet again, this competitive disadvantage of labor-intensive activities is aggravated by tight labor market conditions. So it's no wonder that the circular economy is not really materializing. In the EU, the circular material use rate only increased 1.5% since 2010, and the global circularity rate is dropping. So it's interesting that for at least 30 years, the European Commission has been supporting both principles of shifting the tax burden from labor to resource use, to have polluters pay on the one hand, and make work pay off, both for employees and employers. And we call this shift the tax shift from labor to green taxes. And it's really the idea that we don't necessarily need more taxes, we need smarter taxes. But unfortunately, still the tax system incentivizes pollution and penalizes jobs. So maybe just another piece of the puzzle in terms of where sustainability, climate interacts with resilient supply chains and future-proof business model innovation.
Thanks. So, Georgia, let me get your reaction to some of the feedback we've heard so far. Femke saying that the tax mix is no longer fit for purpose, particularly in the way that green taxes are dealt with. Do you agree?
Yeah, so Dave, I think we can discuss, so if we look back on the green economy, environmental economy, I totally agree that we are still very much imbalanced if we want to transition to green. More broadly, to talk about the trends that Mr. Tridico was talking about, I think we are still at the beginning. So I'm a bit afraid of saying we need to change the tax mix because we don't know yet how the other megatrends, with the exclusion of the environmental discussion, we don't know how they are going to impact the tax base. And I think that the data that Kurt has presented on corporate income tax, in a way, they go against what we always thought until very recently. So we thought when I started my career that the corporate income tax was going to disappear, essentially. It's actually the opposite. It's stronger. It gets stronger and stronger, most probably because of a lot of the changes that have happened. Also because in some countries like the US, the share of profit is increasing. So I think we are still at the beginning. I wouldn't want us to rush into thinking how we should change the tax mix, because we don't know how these trends have impacted the economy. It might well be that the trends will impact the economy like Mr. Tridico says. And you know, when I was hearing you speaking, I was thinking this problem is going to be so difficult because we will be left with essentially, if the worst case scenario materializes, we are left with the only tax base, which is essentially profit. Profit is made through intangibles mainly today, and they are very mobile. So we are left with the mobile base, and that's going to be very difficult to square that problem. So when I go in a panic, I tend to say, okay, let's take a step back and see what the big picture. And I think that's what we should be doing. But also, this step back to me means that probably the way to solve a lot of these problems is to get growth going again in Europe. And with an healthy growth, all these problems of reallocating essentially the tax base they don't go away, but they become much less stringent. So I wonder if in the medium term, whilst we make up our mind on how the tax base will change, maybe we should invest a lot in spurring this growth before the big trends hit us massively.
Let's talk a bit about what's possible at EU level as we sit here next to the European Commission headquarters. MEP Tridico, we know that taxation is member state competence mostly, and there are strict limits in terms of subsidiarity. What would you say can be done by the EU to tackle some of these mismatches that we've talked about so far?
Well, that's true. We have national policy are competent for tax policy. However, as I always say, multinational, for instance, which are today dominant actually in this scenario of economy, are not national, are multinational. So we keep facing a multinational issue with a national policy. So there is obviously a problem. Yeah? As far as the bulk of the economy is more and more done by multinational and less done by small and medium enterprise. Yeah? So we need to solve this issue, which is, as you said, but actually this is a problem. Given that, we can start with some introduction at European level, which would make easier the problem of multinational from one side, and from another side would favor the shift, the policy tax mix shift from what is today not an equilibrium towards what could be a better equilibrium, which is the idea to introduce, and I'm very convinced about that, to introduce a digital taxation at European level. We are overwhelmed by digital services everywhere, actually, and that we are the biggest economy in the world as far as consumption, mature consumption is concerned. Although we know that there is China and India, which is bigger than us, but we are the biggest market in volume than any market. And our market is actually a user market of digital product of services, which are mostly Americans, actually. This is not against America. It's a fact that actually there is a vacuum there to be covered. There is a huge bill of and potential revenue which we just do not collect. A digital tax service at European level would favor two things. First of all, would avoid the fragmentation that we have in Europe. Today, more and more European countries are introducing their own digital service tax, in particular after the failure, let's say, of the Pillar 1 scheme, which is not going ahead. And so this would avoid a fragmentation. Since OECD Pillar 1 is not going anywhere, we need a European answer on that. And introducing a digital service tax at European level would avoid the fragmentation that we observe among member states. And we would avoid as well something which we observed 20, 30 years ago when we saw some multinational going in some country where this was favored by some tax policies which were very, very low for attracting firms. I'm referring to Ireland in particular. What I mean that if we have today a digital service tax based at European level, we avoid as well this unloyal competition among us, which would distort the market. So this is, I think, that is a vacuum which would favor the economy from one side, increase the revenue, and giving rooms to decrease some tax burden from profit and from people taxes, which is today what I think is necessary. There is another issue on which we need to focus our attention as well, and I hope I don't appear too much ideological on that. But it is as well a consequence of the accumulation of wealth that we are experiencing. I'm referring in particular to the wealth taxation, which is today relevant only if you apply at European level. The level of inequality that we observe in the last decades has been amazingly high. And today, when we speak about wealth taxation, I understand the objection of some, even economists, who say, look, we already have income taxes, we already have capital taxes, the wealth is basically income which is saved, why we need to tax it again? The point is simple. Today, most of the welfare people are themselves, they behave like companies. Think about Elon Musk. Do you think Elon Musk is an individual? I think that he's basically himself is a company. He moves capital as he would be a company. So if we have in mind the old scheme of wealth taxation on individuals 40 years ago, you're right. Or critical people would be, they have right to say they object this because this is saving. You cannot tax it again. But today we have such a mixture of income which come. I cannot define whether the income of Elon Musk come from labor, come from capital, come from technology. I don't know from where it comes. So that's why it is very important today to go beyond the classical definition of capital taxation, of income taxation, as far as billion revenue is concerned, not for middle class and not for ordinary firms, but I refer to level of wealth which goes beyond what is commonly understanding as normal. So the wealth tax, for instance, 100 million euro will not create any problem for people unless you introduce it for people and for business, unless you introduce it at European level. Well, if you introduce it in one member state, this will create some problem. So you asked me what to do at European level. I gave you two suggestions. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I think you might have to, do you have to leave now?
I'm sorry, yeah.
Yes, well, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much. I'm really sorry for that, but I'm really sorry to go. Thank you.
No, thank you. A round of applause for MEP Tridico. Femke, I wanted to ask you the same question. With all the limits of subsidiarity, which MEP Tridico was just mentioning, do you agree with those two steps that he outlined that can be done at EU level? And do you see any other possibilities, particularly when it comes to green planet taxes?
Absolutely, yeah, because I think the role of the Commission and the EU institutions can be much more about facilitating this transition, helping, supporting member states, facilitating dialogue and knowledge, and share experiences of what kind of policies have worked in different countries and that might have, worked better, and learn from those experiences. So I think other than introducing specific EU taxes, there's a lot more that can be done to facilitate the thinking of the tax mix. And I would also like to quickly, because I don't really share the thought that you had to wait and see what the megatrends are bringing. I mean, if we look at climate and environment, it's already in our face. It's already happening. I mean, half the global population is suffering from water stress, more than a month per year. The cost of water stress are already up to 6% in some areas, 6% of GDP. Air pollution is killing 6.7 million people annually around the world, which is causing $8.1 trillion in taxes, in health damages per year. I mean, even the Dutch live 13 months shorter because of air pollution. So, that's a trend we should not ignore, of course. And then, of course, the droughts, the floods, the crop failures that are already causing our groceries to become more expensive. I mean, the crop growth in Spain is much harder because of droughts, etc. So environment might be less on the agenda in business now. I mean, there's of course, it's harder to push for that agenda. But the physical reality will not change. It will only get worse, and it's affecting people and it's affecting businesses. So when I look at the total tax contribution report, it's very, very interesting. It's very brave of the groups to present this data like this, and it's a great basis for conversation around how we should structure the tax mix to better serve the kinds of business models that we want to see growing in the future. So from my perspective, it strikes me that in the tax mix, it is obvious where the incentives for business are right now to save costs. I mean, if 2.3% of the total tax base in companies is on planet taxes, and 28% is people taxes, it's clear where the incentives are, where we want to save costs, and no wonder that is what is happening in business. By the way, we have to note that the people taxes tend to reflect only the taxes collected, the taxes borne, the taxes collected on behalf of the governments, again, add another big chunk of cost to businesses. So they're compounding the cost and therefore incentives to minimize labor input. And this affects the hiring and firing of people. I mean, we can't deny that. And so looking at the tax mix, both from a government and EU perspective and a business perspective, and bringing those two together and maybe map what is still missing, the planet taxes in the total tax contribution report. I don't think they include ETS payments because they're not a tax, or CBAM payments, which are coming up, or EPR schemes. So there's a conversation that we can have around, where are the incentives, where are the costs for business, and how can we structure the tax mix so that we get the outcome from business that we need, which is flourishing business models, profitable business models that fit the circular economy.
Kurt, let's zoom out to a global level here. How does Europe compare to other regions when it comes to this tax shift? And does the fragmentation of the EU's tax systems, the 27 different tax systems, put it at a competitive disadvantage compared to the United States, which has different state tax regimes but does have one federal tax?
Right, so that's a big question. I think we've seen some of the difference at kind of an aggregate macro level in some of the statistics that were shared in the total tax contribution reports, and then also in some of the statistics. I mean, the reliance on different tax types in this part of the world is different than in other parts of the world, and the overall level of taxation tends to be higher. So this then causes these concerns that we may be becoming less competitive in Europe because of the level of taxation that we work with. And it's very interesting to hear how that is being connected to let's say, the tax shift in a green direction. I always try to figure out if I hear these stories about the green tax shift, how that is going to be received by the tax policy people that I work with every day, who are in charge of raising the revenue that needs to be raised to keep government functioning. And I think there are various responses that we should consider. And I think that actually having that dialogue between the different communities is of the essence to be able to make progress. So in that sense, it's very good to have these types of discussions. I think what tax people will not like all that much when they hear the tax shift proposals is this idea of differentiation of various types of taxes to gear towards environmental outcomes, circular economy outcomes. That's going to be a big discussion to have to see whether that is going to be well received, because there is the notion that simplicity and uniform rates tend to be more suitable from a pure efficiency point of view, which of course does not include your environmental objectives. And so there is a difference in sensitivities there. I think what will be liked, and this connects to the megatrends discussion, is that the tax shift at this point really begins to sound like a base broadening exercise. The tax base is going to be broadened because we shift to consumption, we shift to capital income, not so much labor income alone. And base broadening to a tax policy person, that's music to their ears, right? Because that allows for a broader tax base, lower rates to raise the same amount of revenue. And this then could point to some kind of shared interests. I mean, it is true that capital income, as was mentioned, wealth taxes we can discuss, but capital income inheritances. These are more resilient tax bases in view of aging than labor income itself. So there is that shared direction of travel, I think. What I would have some concerns about, I mentioned how we see that green taxation is moving in the direction of being influenced by competitiveness, affordability concerns. Very clear evidence of that currently and in the past few years, for example, in response to the Ukraine induced energy price hikes. So when we see that in working with energy taxes, environmental taxes, governments introduce affordability considerations, introduce competitiveness considerations. You're right, ETSs are not a tax, but they're a form of carbon pricing. You see very broad use of free permits, and in the future, maybe other approaches to ensuring a level playing field. Many of these mechanisms involve a cut in the revenue that you can expect from these tax innovations. So the idea that there is in practice going to be a possibility of a major shift in terms of the structure of revenue by moving in the direction of green taxation, I think should not be overstated. We should be very careful with that. And I mean, that kind of leads to a broad view that the tax mix that we have is not ideal and needs to evolve, but it will evolve gradually and not with deep step changes, I think. So that's what I would say.
Right. So we have just 5 minutes left, and I want to take 2 questions from the audience before we wrap up. So if you can keep the answers very short. First question, George, is for you. It's from Paul Bosch van Drekstein. Do you expect or should the EU go it alone in tax policies when multilateral solutions seem to be difficult to reach right now at the UN and at the OECD, or should it continue to seek multilateral consensus or compromises?
What a good question. So I think it depends on what we want to achieve and what the constraints are. I think that at the moment, the vocation of Europe is to be multilateral, and we should never drop that. But we could be a bit more pragmatic and first of all think of what do we want to achieve. I think the priority now is growth for what we have just described. Good growth reduces the constraints and the pain of taking some decisions. And if we have to go it alone at the moment, maybe we should think about that. It really depends on what we want to achieve. This doesn't mean dropping, our vocation of working multilaterally, but at the moment it is difficult. And in a way, we need to, support our economy. So for me, it's about being pragmatic at this point in time.
Thanks. So the next question is for Femke. Question is from Francois Marlier from KPMG. Moving incentives from carbon-intensive energy towards green energy is indeed essential, but is a tax shift a long-term solution? In a net zero economy, what and who would be taxed?
Yeah, great question. Digital services, for example. There's really no boundary to creativity in tax people's options but this also speaks to the question or the point raised by Kurt in terms of complexity and eroding the tax revenues if they're effective in changing behavior. And this is a fear that many people have when introducing or thinking about new taxes. But the thing is, if the Dutch would have thought about this way about taxing natural gas, we would have missed out on 400 billion euros of tax revenues over the last few decades. So it can never be a reason not to introduce these kinds of pricing mechanisms. The ETS has raised 180 billion euros already as well. So, yes, some tax bases, green taxes, might erode, and you'd have to move to other tax bases as well. There's a plethora of options to tax pollution and resource use, and we just need to be, ahead of the game, and we have to advance the tax system to evolve with the development of the economy. So it's not like we can introduce one tax and then wait and see what happens. So the question, what do we do in 2050 when we're zero carbon? I mean, there will be other options, and will have to introduce them before that, of course. So there is a roadmap that you can draw in terms of expanding the tax base or increasing rates and shifting to other types of taxes.
Great, well, that's all the time we have for the panel. Some really interesting insights there. I think it's given us a lot to think about for the rest of the day. How about a round of applause for our excellent panelists? And now I'm going to turn over the floor for some closing thoughts from Gerasimos Thomas, who is the Director General for Taxation and Customs Union at the European Commission.
Thank you. I'm not sure if I should turn my back to you.
It's okay, it's fine.
I will move it here.
I think it has to stay there for the camera, actually.
Oh, okay. Okay.
We don't mind if you have your back to us.
Sorry. Okay, then. Okay, thank you very much, and congratulations for the two reports that were presented today. I think you stole a bit this symposium word from our EU tax symposium that we do with the, let's say, with the European Parliament every year, and the next one is on the 16th and 17th of March. I'm sure, Pasquale, if he had said he would stay that, and we will have a 1.5 day that we will go through some things. First of all, I think it's commendable that the total tax contribution study, it gives information from companies. We have 80 companies telling us that they raise 550 billion. I think there are some methodological issues that one can discuss and evaluate a bit, dig in further. I'm sure in the discussion this afternoon you will discuss some of these issues. But overall, as I think as one of the speakers said, there is a good sign of transparency, of sharing this data and looking, on what it means for the primarily big companies, 80 companies, there were 73 companies last year. And I think it gives us a different perspective, and we need to debate these issues. Not surprisingly, they give the same broad picture, that there are very certain part is company taxation, certain part is labor taxation, the two big parts, and the planet or green taxes are very small. So I think this is a message that it is consistent with the general data. To what degree now this input, let's say the input from the study is fit for purpose as it is for policy making, I think it needs some discussion, but it is a kind of useful additional indicator and control factor that you can take into account. Just as we are in the sort of corporate taxation area, I think it will be good. We will publish, I think, in a couple of weeks, an important study focusing on the tax gaps, the Mind the Gap study. It's a new product that we were doing at the Commission at the level of DG TaxSud. And there most of you, I think, in Brussels or also the people listening, they are familiar with the VAT gap study that we look at what is the VAT gap. It remains at around 9.5% of what we collect. I will not give you all the numbers because it's for the next press releases. But I think it is important to note we do some important new work that we look at the CIT gap study, and this is higher than the VAT gap study. I will not give you the number, but there is still, issues to be solved. And if you zoom in at the VAT, there is the policy gap and the compliance gap, collection gap. So there are these issues around corporate taxation and corporate tax CIT gap that we will debate now with once we publish our new publication. And I think it's important to keep looking into this and matching the official data with company data. Now, I think it's an important debate also on megatrends from the panel. I think the The megatrends that we see today published by the report are consistent with the megatrends that we have also data that we have been publishing over the last couple of years. From the Commission's point of view, first of all, as we launched this EU Tax Symposium Mind the Gap, let's say, series, so I don't think I can agree with Georgia, who says, don't do anything about the gap. We think it is important. The problem is one of economics. Economists, we rely so much on data, so in a fast-pacing world, we look backwards. We look at the mirror. You look at the data and you look backwards. And I think that is a problem, whether it is for economists looking on what will happen with revenue. This is a problem of what industrial policy. Look, just to move outside a little bit, now we are doing paying attention on industrial policy. We are paying attention to our trade defense, for example, or defense instruments. And whenever you need a lot of data, automatically you look, you favor if you do policy, the old policies, or you favor the incumbents. If you look at, an established companies, new companies do not have data. So I think that is an issue that we have to take into account. I think the panel had a very rich discussion. I don't want to summarize. Pasquale mentioned about, the importance of losing tax base. He is concerned primarily of labor tax base, but losing of it. Georgia focused a lot on growth. And Kurt, he's mentioned on the differences across the world, and the increased demand on tax revenue. I pick up the issues that I agree, so, on this I abuse and also the effort that we need to make to broaden the tax base. And Femke, of course, she focuses a lot on the green, taxation and our incapacity, let's say, to put environmental taxation at the center of our system. I had some sympathy. That's why she invited me actually to this, because that. But I think here, looking forward, I think we have different issues, if I may. The issue of labor, capital, and consumption taxation going forward, there are 3 established bases of taxation worldwide. And I think they will be there, whatever we decide in Europe. They will be the core areas of taxation worldwide. And I would add that we see, we focused a lot on the OECD countries, but we see that there is at the G20 level a very important work that it is being done on the level of domestic resource mobilization. Taxation income in all across the world is becoming increasingly an issue of analysis, debate, and shapes the taxation systems on the medium, let's say, and developing countries, medium-sized countries, and less developed countries. So we have the paradox that we had this debate, we have actually discussed, I think, 3 years ago in one of the panels, all the developed world had, let's say, 98% of the government revenue was tax revenue, and in the very less developed countries, 95% of the revenue is tariff revenue, customs tariff revenue. And here we have a bit of a rebalancing. I mean, one unexpected issue that we don't comment, we tax people, but I deal with both, is that we have a substantial increase in tariff revenue. And when we look at the tax of the revenue of the governments, we in the European Union only last year we had 6 billion more coming from the different sort of defense instruments. We are not the US who is putting this, and we have not the new, let's say, the new tariffs were not in place. So if you look at the customs tariff revenue that flows, 75% of it flows to the EU budget, you have a very good EU indicator that Pasquale was looking at what we can do at an EU level on what it flies. And I think the less developed countries or the developing countries put a lot of efforts on the domestic resource mobilization. They structure their systems because they do believe that the tax system is a good way to shape future revenue and future expenditure. So I think while we have, it is inevitable that our labor tax base will be restructured. I think it will be, all the trends show that we have to be lower labor taxation, either in order to increase growth or in order to give incentives to people to come to the labor market, or in order to make work pay. Whatever you have to do, I think we are not going to see in 20 years the same structure on the labor taxation as we have now. And we might have to compete more on labor taxation if we let everybody go to Tunisia or somewhere else to work and work in Europe. I think we will have more challenges. So we might have, let's say, to deploy policies that, in a certain way restrict if we see how it works. I don't think it is in our intention now, but I think we have to deal with the changes in the labor part of taxation. I think capital taxation and consumption taxation will remain around these parameters. Some can increase a little bit or can go down. I think then we have to look at the remaining part of the tax base is probably behavior taxation. We had this in the past. We had it, in the real estate in Amsterdam shows this with the small facades. We had energy, alcohol. I don't think there will be so much alcohol or so much energy to tax in the future, so there will be something else. But the part of the taxation base that is in behavioral taxation mode and serves other objectives, and not only revenue objectives, it might be, as you said, not so efficient for the taxman, but it will be there. And I think just to be realistic, as I think Georgia said, we have to be realistic. So we ourselves, the Commission, just in 1 year of the new Commission, we have made a lot of tax recommendations included in many other policy areas, whether it is the Savings and Investment Union, the Clean Investment, there will be 28th regime, there will be pension reform. So the fact that you have some tax policy to influence the behavior and the conduit of other policies, it will remain part of the tax debate without necessarily being the part that it will be the solution to the change of the tax system due to megatrends. So I think that is my contribution, that the one does not exclude the other. We have to be, let's say, realistic about this. Net, I think also, as it was said by the one of the previous speakers, it is difficult to see with the defense expenditure that we have undertaken to see how we will look at the total reduction of the tax revenue. It will be difficult in the short term, given the macroeconomic situation, the fiscal balance, so we have to be intelligent about this. But I think, the work that you are doing here, the debate we are having, should not lead to complacency. I think we need to move forward and not look backwards. Thank you.
Thanks very much for those remarks. Very, very useful to hear what's on the Commission's radar going forward. So now we're going to take a 20-minute break just outside here. You can talk more about these issues, and then we'll be back in here at 2:30 for the next panel, which is on circular business models and the tax mix. See you then.
So welcome everybody, guests, online participants, to the Tax and Circular Economy Symposium. My name is Jaime de Bourbon-Parma. I'm the climate envoy of the Netherlands, and I represent 5 ministries of the Netherlands on global climate diplomacy. And I welcome you on behalf of the EBTF, the Plus Us, and the Tax project. And it's really wonderful to be with you. This is my last event as climate envoy. So when Femke came to me and asked, could you moderate this session, I immediately said yes. I've seen half of the last 10 years of the Paris Agreement, five climate summits, and these are like Olympic games for climate diplomats. So there's many different disciplines, and circularity is one of them. And what I see in the last 10 years of the Paris Agreement, we see that we did shift the needle with getting nearly 200 countries together. First of all, legitimacy. Every country gets to fight for their future. Even Vanuatu or the Marshall Islands say our island is disappearing, and there's only one place on Earth where I can fight for my survival, and that's the climate summits. So it's inclusive. And we do see that joint attention, that every year we get together nearly 200 countries. And no country says, I'll skip a year. There's one country that did this year. But most countries, nobody followed that one country. So everyone shows up every year, whether you're pro-climate or you want to postpone it because your income model is still fossil fuels, everybody shows up. And we shift the needle from a projected 4 degrees world towards a 2.6 degrees world if we implement all the policies that we've promised to implement. And there's been an OECD survey that just came out prior to the summit, which asked all its member states, but also beyond, do you think that the climate summits actually increase ambition? And they said, absolutely yes, because of the attention, because of the NDCs, which are the climate plans that every 5 years need to be implemented, and so this definitely drives ambition. Is it enough? No. Will it resolve everything? No. So it's part of the solution. It's a government structure that contributes, but we need to do much more. And the good news is, if you look at the real economy, the IEA came out, the International Energy Agency, came out with a report showing that $3 trillion is invested into energy, 2 trillion is going to clean energy, 1 trillion to fossil fuels. So the shift is already happening in the real economy. So that's beyond policy. So real things are happening. And also when I speak to the private sector, mostly in Europe, but also beyond, they say we're already focusing on net zero plans for 2 reasons. We want to be competitive. We want to be part of where the economy is going. Second, we want to reduce costs. Resources today are cheaper than tomorrow, than in 5 years and 10 years. So focusing on that is already important. And there's a link towards the circular economy there as well. Now, if I look back at COP30, the last of my Olympic endeavors in the climate diplomacy, it was the longest COP I've ever seen because they had to stretch it out because they needed the leaded summit, so the prime ministers and the presidents before the climate summit, not during, because they didn't have enough hotel rooms in Belém. And there was a lot of framing. And that shows we were all over the place this year. It was the implementation COP. It was the 10 years Paris Agreement COP. It was the ambition COP, the adaptation COP, the truth COP, the solidarity COP, the Amazon COP, the roadmap COP, etc., etc. So I want to frame it or summarize it as the recalibration COP. Maybe we are looking back at 10 years Paris agreements and we're trying to look forward, how is it going to look like? And secondly, how do we navigate a very rapidly changing geopolitical setting? So that's a recalibration going forward. The outcome of this COP, we're always disappointed, some years more than others, and this is one of those where I say, well, we're happy we didn't make steps backward, because if you look at the geopolitics, that could have happened as well. There could have been a wrecking balls through the multilateral system, and that didn't happen. So we're quite happy that there's a very, very, very strong push from most countries in the world to keep that multilateral system alive. And the second, to put climate, to make clear that it's maybe not top 1, 2, or 3 anymore, but it's 4 or 5, just under the horizon. And that's a very comfortable place to reconsolidate and refocus and re-engage. It didn't drop to number 25, which people feared. So it's still high on the agenda and going forward. We did make steps which the Global South really wanted on adaptation. So we've identified indicators. What is adaptation? How do you see when a country is becoming more resilient or less resilient? So that's very important for your national plans going forward. And we have agreed on tripling adaptation finance to 2035. So this is what the Global South really is asking from us. But what we haven't landed is a roadmap on transitioning away of fossil fuels. And that's a big blow for those countries, and it's not just the West, Europe and others that are really making the transition happen, but it's also the small island development states. So you see new coalitions happening, and still a lot of hesitation. So Colombia came and said, listen, if we can't agree between 200 countries going forward in a system of, by the way, a consensus, so one country could stop the outcome, which happened, we could move forward with the coalition of the willing. And so we move forward. Colombia is organizing an event on the fossil fuel roadmap in Santa Marta in Colombia, and co-host with the Netherlands. So my country is going to move forward on it. More than 80 countries signed off on wanting such a roadmap. So I'm looking forward to create a parallel structure, and maybe that will blend in to climate summits when appropriate. So that's where we are. So Femke asked me, can you moderate this last session? It's the last thing you do as a climate envoy. And yes, because this is systemic change. We really need to shift the system. We need circularity is needed. As Femke already said, 55% of greenhouse gases are associated with a linear extractive economy, and all these resources are already dug out of the ground. So let's use them more effectively. So that's good for people and for climate and for the economy going forward. Gutierrez said, tax pollution, not people. I think that's a very good slogan to use also here. And I would add to it, tax the scarce resources and not people. So that's what TaxX, I believe, is partially about. So I'm looking forward to the dialogue we're going to have about the role of taxes and how to align them with circular economy. It's going to be a very full program. And we'll have very good, top level speakers. And for those online, there's a QR code. You can link into it. You can see the reports, and that will engage you in the future in the dialogue of this discussion. But let me now move to the first speaker, and that is the international trade and environmental taxation lawyer of KPMG, Ruth Guerra. Thank you very much.
I have a presentation. No, yes, it works. Okay. Thank you. I don't know if the presentation is live. Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. My goal today is to share with you some statistical from surveys that we made with some clients, and also our own thoughts about how tax can change circular economy or encourage the circular economy. We have asked let me try to, sure, yes. On our last KPMG CEO Outlook survey, we asked our clients whether the sustainability agenda is still on the table, and the reply for them was yes. It has so they are confident on their commitment to achieve their net zero goals, and with an increase of 10 points compared with what they replied last year. When we look a little bit deeper about what are the main obstacles that they see, number one for them is the complexity of the decarbonization of the supply chain, which represents 25% of the reply. The second obstacle for them is the lack of skills and expertise for 20% of the replies. And the last one is the cost, which is only mentioned by 11% of the CEO. So the shift is important on the movement of the net zero agenda. It shows that the decarbonization challenge is now primarily focused on the supply chain, on redesigning the supply chain, and is also linked to the fact that we are on a different geopolitical situation than what we were 5 years ago, in which the decarbonization of the supply chain is not only linked to the decarbonization itself, it's also linked to the fact that commodities volatility are increasing. We have a strong dependency, so circular model can also help to be more resilient at the European level. We have also performed a circularity gap report with the World Bank, the Circular Economy Foundation, and KPMG, which shows that the economy was only almost 7% circular in 2027. And even if the circular business case is increasing, because there was an investment growth of 87% in 2021 compared to 2020, the circular investment represents only 2% of all tracked capital, which is really, really low. So there is a lot of way of improvement, that's for sure, and I think the demand is also there. Let's have a little overview about circular policy landscape. I think that in this part, the framework is really, really encouraging. In the last decade, we had more than 70 national circular economy strategies, which cover more or less 3,000 measures. And in Europe, we have 24 from 27 states that had circular economy plans. We have several types of initiatives, notably in Europe, with the eco-design and sustainable product regulation, battery regulation, packaging and packaging waste regulation that are going also to increase circular business model. And the momentum globally at the COP is also quite encouraging with the Global Circularity Protocol that was launched as the first global voluntary framework for measuring, managing, and communicating circular impact. Well, what is not really encouraging, and it has been discussed before, is the tax mix. When we see that we have less than 5%, which is related to green taxation, and mainly green taxation is energy taxation. It's not resource-based taxation. There is a little bit of waste taxation, but not enough to change behavior and to promote circularity as a long-term business model. We tried to make the slide is not as nice as it should be. No, it doesn't work. Okay, sorry. We tried to make the exercise to determine on all the supply chain what can be the main focus in which tax can influence circularity. So we took a quite classical circular business model with raw materials, manufacturing, service provider, end user, end of life, and we made the loop from a circularity point of view with reuse, refurbish, repair, recycle, and recover. And we try to summarize on green and red. Sorry, it's not really easy to read, but the aim was to take some example about carrots and sticks tax policies. So the green ones that can encourage circularity model, like for example, moving from labor taxation to more resources and product taxation. As an example, VAT can be an example, also reduced tax rate at the level of the consumption of the product, but it's less effective when we are seeing all the business model from the transformation, from the raw material to the transformation of the product. We see that trade, for example, customs, international trade can have also a big impact on this part, notably due to the need of having critical materials and some commodities in which we see that we are having an increased trade tension, let's say like this. Today, when we see trade and customs topics, re-importing or reusing product that has been already exported is quite complicated from a customs point of view. Need to determine what is the tariff curve. There is no decrease. Need to determine also what is the value of the product, and re-importing some waste or spare part can be complicated from a regulatory point of view. And there is also a part of trade and customs that we may not be using enough, which is using quota. We can implement export quota for some type of materials that needs to be reused in Europe because it's needed from the supply chain release point of view. And finally, we were also looking for extended polluter responsibilities, which is not really a tax, but is an eco-contribution, at least that creates a price. It's really effective, as we see with our clients, it's really effective to organize the end of life of product, but it's less effective from a tax point of view, from a cost point of view, because the administrative burden, the way they are built, is much more complicated, taking into account what is really the revenue that is the budget, that the revenue that is created. This was more or less the negative part, so the stick part of the regulation. I think that if we want to move to a more circular business model in which circularity is competitive on a long way, we need to increase the carrots. We need really to improve investments. We have a lot of credit grants and incentives, a lot of them on the R&D part at the beginning, but even if we are funding this part of the analysis to find solution, if after the production phase is not economically viable, then it stops. So we need to really ensure that the carrots that we are going to be able to implement on the country level or European level goes all the way of the production and use of life of a product. Carbon pricing, it has already been discussed before. Carbon pricing is not really a tax, but it increases the cost of the product. It can be really effective, at least at the European level, if there is enough material in Europe then to be purchased. And I think there is another component that is not always taken into account, is that when we implement a circular model and we recycle, there is normally in some business cases a huge energy consumption. Energy taxation consumption is not at all linked when we are on circular model, and this is something that needs to be taken into account when we see the high energy crisis that we have. And the last point was about resources, taxing more the resources and the raw material than the labor cost, but it has been already discussed, and I think it's going to be the topic on the panel after. So I think that the conclusion from my side is really to think that tax is a global ecosystem, needs to be aligned in carrots and sting all the long of the supply chain, and circularity business model needs to be competitive from an economic point of view if we want them to be long-term efficient, and this is something that needs to be taken into account all the way of the tax agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ruth Guerra, for this opening statement. And indeed, 6.9% of circular economy, only 2% of investment into the sector. So you can see it as a major problem or a major opportunity, depending how you see it. But then you need the landscape to be right and the tax incentives and other incentives to be aligned. So this is a topic today. So thank you very much for those opening remarks. And the second speaker, who will also join us in the panel later, she's a Director Environment Optimization and Production Continuity at Novo Nordisk. Please welcome Marie-Louise Hedde.
Thank you. Just setting up here. So my slides probably also come up in a minute. Oh, I think it's, yeah, good. Thank you, and thank you for having me here today. I come from Novo Nordisk. Sorry. I think I just lost my mic here. I'm not sure. I think I will, yeah. Thanks. So a lot has been said already. So now I will talk a little bit about, you could say, the Danish case study, and Denmark has actually also been mentioned a few times, or at least I saw the slides earlier from Georgia mentioning Denmark, and this about the tax shift. That is actually what that journey that we have been on. I will not talk so much about Novo Nordisk. Femke has asked me to join here because of my background and my career, and I will just allude a little to that. So I started my career. I'm an economist, by the way, just for your information. I started my career in the Ministry of Taxation, working very much in the indirect tax space, not so much the VAT as Ruth talked to, but mainly within energy taxes, CO2 taxes, other kinds of environmental taxes, but also health taxes. And then I made huge tax reforms. I will get back to that in a minute. And then I joined KPMG that Ruth also represented, going from there into a lobby organization called the Danish Energy Agency. Today it's called, association, which is now called Green Power Denmark. And then I went back into the ministerial world to the Danish Energy Agency under the Ministry of Climate. In 2018, I joined Novo Nordisk as head of indirect tax, so customs duties, VAT, and of course still the environmental taxes. From a global perspective, that was my role. And this year I transitioned into sustainability. So I've had, back and forth within tax and sustainability throughout my career. But that's about me. So Denmark introduced, and I'm not sure if we were actually the first ones in the world, but at least I know we were some of the first ones to introduce a CO2 tax. And we did that in 1992. And that was, we had energy taxes before. We got those during the oil crisis in the 70s. That's when we got the energy taxes already. But then this was actually the first CO2 tax, at least in our country. Then several tax reforms came along. I will not dig into those right now. But in 2005, we sort of embedded the ETS or the emission trading system into the Danish legislation. And I've heard several aspects or several talks about that ETS is not a tax. And no, it's not a tax, but it's actually two sides of the same coin. And instead of having a high CO2 tax and then adding the ETS on top, we decided to take everything that was ETS, would get the ETS quota price, of course, and then removing the CO2 tax, which is maybe backwards from what has been talked about today, but for the non-ETS, then raising it to the same level. Leveling out, ensuring that carbon tax across was still the same as when we had the uniform tax. Then the spring package came in 2009, and I was actually lucky to be driving the part around the energy taxes and the environmental taxes. I will get back to that later, but the header here was growth, climate, and lower taxes, talking very much into the subject. Then there has been multiple changes in the energy taxation up until 2022. Also, decline in the labor taxes, which is probably also interesting for most to know. And that is continuing. Also, I can share that from the 1st of January, we will once again have lower labor taxes. So the shift is very much happening in Denmark. But the latest tax reform, I will just share a little bit about that, because as we might have been the first on the CO2 tax, I'm not entirely sure if we were actually the first, but one of the first, the new tax will introduce a tax on agriculture, so the methane tax, you could call it. But it will not go into effect yet. It will go into effect in 2030. And the agricultural sector is actually helping the journey on how that should look like. At the same time, there's also an increased tax for companies like ours but it's phased in. So it's not something that happens overnight, it's something that's phased in so that companies like ours can adapt to the new reality. So the 2009 tax reform actually shifted 4 billion euros from, you could say, increase the taxes of what we don't want, so the pollution, and then decreased more distorting taxes. And this was under the header of getting the labor supply up. There were also other more distorting taxes there, so it was not just on the labor, but this was actually the header, like growth, climate, lower tax. That was the ambition. And for the government, it cost 0. It was in out 4 billion. The positives, of course, was around the CO2 reductions, but also other kinds of taxes, like, for example, the tax on saturated fat. That was to drive, you could say, a more healthy, you could say, lifestyle. Maybe it got a bit too complicated, at least it got cut later. But that was at least the ambition to drive these. I think Gerasimos called it behavioral taxes. And that's exactly what we saw. And then there's about the labor supply also increasing. So you have win-win-win all the way down. That was at least the idea. So we have a lot of green taxes in Denmark. And I will not go into all of them. But I will just say that, of course, when you start this journey, then you start it maybe a bit simple, but then sometimes it also gets a little more complicated. And if you look at this slide, and actually I had like it would come up one at a time, so maybe it's a bit difficult to see here, but I think I have at least 5 or 6 different types of regulating CO2, including what comes from the EU with the, of course, the ETS, but also with the CBAM. So this about, you could say, the complexity increasing, that is at least an issue in Denmark. And I can share that when I went in as an advisor in KPMG, the complexity meant that companies were either paying too much or maybe paying too little. So that is the downside if you complicate matters. And that brings me to my last slide, which is, I believe that this around taxes and driving what you want to get out of it, it makes a lot of sense, but it needs to be simple. It needs to be also clear what you want to achieve. So like you also alluded to, Femke, about the natural gas tax, that's actually very, not difficult, it's very easy to understand at all levels of society, but also for households, how to adapt to that. So it needs to be simple, but putting too much, you could say, offsetting into that tax can actually dilute the intention of a tax. It also needs to be transparent, and this about the phasing in that I alluded to before, it also makes a lot of sense also due to the fact that you can then innovate and look into how to avoid it maybe. And basically avoid a multi-regulation like I talked to before, because it simply just complicates things. And then, I mean, this about using the revenue and transform it into removing other kinds of distorting taxes. That also means that there will be maybe more support for such a tax regime. So, yeah, basically make it easy to make it right. I think that's at least how the Danish, you could say, learnings have been, if you want to drive both the green agenda, increase labor supply, and make the tax shift. take this one.
Thank you. Test. Thank you, Marie-Louise Hede. Thank you for your example. And as from the Netherlands, when we look at Denmark, we're also slightly annoyed because you're just ahead of us on so many things. So it's wonderful to listen to you, to see how in practice you're delivering, and all other countries can follow examples and see where the pitfalls are. And amongst them is complicating issues. How do we make it simple and effective going forward? So thank you very much for your introduction. We're now moving towards the panel. We have 3 speakers that I'm asking to come forward, and I think you're going to join us on the panel, so please join us. We have Benoit Désirot of Chanel. Please join us. We have Gerian Gomez of IKEA. Welcome. And we have Fias Darshan of SKF. And last but not least, we have our moderator of our session, which is Femke Groothuis, president of the X-Tax Project, an independent think tank, and she will moderate this session. Welcome to Femke, and applause to all the panelists.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, panelists, for joining us, and thank you all for being here. First of all, I'd like to introduce the speakers on our panel, and then I'm going to ask them a few questions consecutively, after which I hope there's time for them to respond to each other. So on my left, of course, Marie-Louise, whom you've just met. She works for Novo Nordisk, which is a global health company founded 100 years ago, and I always like to mention that. It's so interesting. So you've just learned about her journey, professional journey, and we're going to ask her some more about her experiences in Denmark. Then we have, we have a different order. Fias is International Trade Manager of SKF Group Supply Chain. He has been at SKF for 18 years. And if you don't know SKF, it's a 9.3 billion turnover company. It's the world's largest bearing manufacturer with 44,000 employees in 108 manufacturing units. Bearings are needed in almost everything that has moving parts, ranging from wind turbines to cars and fans and microwaves. SKF, by the way, is almost 120 years old. And its long-standing sustainability mission of SKF is dubbed Fighting Friction, which I like very much. So there we have Benoit, who has over 20 years of experience in tax, and he's been with Chanel for 11 years. He's European head of tax. He's also EBTF board member and board member of Plus Us, which is a group, an informal group of tax leaders who believe in driving societal transformation through tax. Gerianne, at the far end, is a fiscal economist and specialized in indirect tax. She is group tax leader at IKEA Group. And I think it's safe to say we all have IKEA products in our home. So we're probably all clients. Gerianne is also an active member of the Dutch Tax Association, engaging with industry advancements and best practices. So Marie-Louise, to start with you. You are a strong advocate for tax and sustainability, and your career has spanned across government and advisory, as well as public affairs and global cooperation. You've worked on these themes from so many angles. So could you just explain a little bit more on why you are so passionate about the role of tax in addressing societal issues?
Yes. So of course, like I said, I'm an economist. So I really like to see these economic instruments work in you could say the real life world. And but I also actually think back to my point from before. It's also this about if you design the tax in the right way, then it's also understandable for everybody why they need to do it, and the incentives there is you could say more clear. So I think that is mainly that, and then maybe also the fact that since it's such a strong driver, and now we didn't see in the overview from before how you could say
the energy consumption is actually decoupled from the Danish growth. I think that's also very, very key, and also talks to the testament of how effective taxes actually are.
So you've seen it work in practice, and
of course, it's always difficult to say that it's only the tax working, right? Because we have so many other instruments, but at least it's a key driver, I think.
Yeah. Okay. And so you mentioned in your presentation that Denmark has implemented it, but learning from the Danish experience, how can governments safeguard the social impacts as well as the impacts across businesses? So I've learned over time that there are so many ways that Denmark reduced labor taxes, so payroll taxes, pension contributions. They've provided subsidies to small business. They've used funding for reduced or higher personal deductions. So there's a lot of policy measures that have been included in these packages. And so could you allude a little bit on the social impacts and the impacts across business?
Yes, so you could say, at least when I was at the Ministry of Taxation, we also always looked into, you could say, the consequences of making a tax or making the tax shift. And it always came down to how would it impact the lower income groups. So if you take a lot of these behavioral taxes, you could say, is products or consumption that we all have, including the single mom with two children and a low income. And in Denmark, in the spring package of 2.0 that I alluded to also in my presentation, a so-called green check was introduced, meaning that the increased energy taxes and CO2 taxes, etc., was actually offset by a green check. That meant that she would get zero impact, basically, but also that she still had the incentive to reduce on her, I don't know, electricity bill or her heating bill or whatever, but at least offset the additional cost, if you could say it like that. But for businesses, it is of course more difficult because there's also the state aid regime around that. But of course there are also measures there. But I would say that in this tax reform, the dying wish, or what you should say, at least the burning wish, was a lower tax on income, on labor income, and that's what they got. So
right. So in the communications, that was also a powerful argument for people to support this. Yes. Yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to share from the experience, and what other countries can learn from Denmark?
Yeah, and I think I also alluded to that before. I think this about the phasing in. This about, you know, not overnight changing the taxes, giving people, businesses time to adapt to what comes next. And in Denmark, it's usually 5 years before it's fully implemented. I think that's at least, and also it gives time to innovate instead of just being hit exactly overnight by a very high, usually tax.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So Jeriana, I'd like to jump to you. Could you briefly explain, because not everybody knows the structure of IKEA, the IKEA franchise system and what the role is of inter-IKEA group versus the various franchises?
Yes, I can do that, Femke. I think everybody knows indeed IKEA. IKEA is very popular, but a lot of people don't know that it's a franchise system. So what does that mean, a franchise system? You have on one side, you have the franchisor, which is inter-IKEA group. On the other side, you have the franchisees or the retailers, which are independent group of companies, and they are the ones that actually operate the different stores that you guys go into. So from a franchisor perspective, we are then the concept owner, so we own the IKEA concept, and we franchise that concept to various parties around the world. We also have a division where we design the IKEA products, and we also produce and sell the IKEA products to the wholesaler, to the retailer. So we don't have consumer-to-consumer activities, so it's more business-to-business The only exception is, though, I have to say that for those that come to the Netherlands or that from the Netherlands, that there's only one store at this moment in the Netherlands owned by the franchisor, and that's the store in Delft. So it's the only one that's owned by the franchisor. And last year, in December 2024, we also bought a few more stores in the Baltics region. So those are also the ones that are operated by the franchisor. But all of the other stores in the globe are operated by independent franchisees companies. I think now we have around 12 independent franchisees. A lot of them, a big one in Europe, the Inca Group. We also have a lot of them in the Middle East, and in Africa, North Africa, Asia, and Latin America, and America. So there's a lot of IKEA, I would say, worldwide. Yeah.
Thanks. It's good to know because you take the perspective of Inter-IKEA. So would you tell us which circular business models Inter-IKEA is developing?
That's a very good question. I mean, we do have the objective to become a circular business model, but as I said, it's difficult because we are on the starting point, you could say, of the production. But we do see that from a design perspective, already 80% of the environmental impact is from the design part. So when we design a product, we look at, okay, sustainability is a big part of it. And when we talk about sustainability, there's a different elements that we can talk about, but one of them is indeed circularity. So we look at our business and our products and we say, hey, how can we ensure that the products, the IKEA products that we are building have a long lifespan so they can be used for a longer period? But also how can they be repaired or reused, recycled? So that's also part of our circular business model that we're trying to come with products or services that can be easily recycled, reused, and refurbished. I think one good example when it comes to designing part is that, I mean, I think everybody knows the POC system, so that's the big wardrobe that you have hopefully in your home. So recently we changed also the back side of the frame so it can easily be folded. So when you move to a different house, you can easily take it with you. So it's really easy assembly and reassembly. Yeah, and I think also the dowel wedges. So when you assemble a product, it's also easier. So it's one thing is trying to make it easier for you to assemble the product, but also easy to disassemble when you go. So not throw it away, but easily, reuse it again in a different setting.
Which of course extends the life cycle of the product. I was also struck by the fact that you sell assembly parts. You provide assembly parts. They're not even for sale, but in order to enable customers to repair their own products or
yeah. So we're really trying to focus indeed on the repair part. Some of them is indeed, it's our concept that you pick the package up yourself. So you also you assemble it yourself. You try to repair it yourself. So we try to facilitate that by providing these assembly parts. Most of them need free of charge that you can get through the stores as a way of prolonging also the life of the product. But we also try to incentivize people to use the product in different ways. I think one of the good examples is also the plastic bag, the Fracta. That's also something that's very popular that we see a lot that people are using not only as a shopping bag, but also as a laundry bag or clothing. So there's a different usage. So that's where we're really trying to use that also as an incentive, as a way of not only prolonging, but also making people aware that you can use the product for different ways.
Yeah. So we'd like to explore the tax implications of circular business models. So I want to ask you, what role do environmental taxes and charges, including CBAM, ETS, EPR fees, play in business model innovation?
I think that's a very, very good question. So if I look also at the recent developments, recent years with CBAM and plastic taxes also being introduced in a few countries, I would say that in a business model itself, in the short term, it's had less impact because, at the end, it's just one line in your supply chain. So there's a lot of more elements that you need to consider when we're talking about a supply chain. But we do see the increased awareness of the business because it's complex, to be able to even do this reporting. So it's not even the charge itself or the cost of paying these taxes, but it's more the effort around it to be able to get the data, to be able to do the reporting. And also, I think one of the hurdles that we have, because we are so multinational, so we are present in a lot of countries, we have to deal with different regulations. So, even if a country introduces plastic tax, it might not always be the same. So it also makes it difficult also for us as a multinational to have one approach, because you always have to accommodate, okay, what is this country saying, what is that country saying? So it also makes it more complex for us as a business to be able to perform in that area. Yeah.
So are you saying that reporting requirements put focus on that kind of material and the supply chain? I mean, I can understand it's maybe annoying to have all the reporting and measures to be taken, but it also puts the spotlight on that part of the supply chain, right? So
and I think CBAM is a very good example, because when it was introduced, it took a lot of effort to educate ourselves. Okay, what is CBAM? What is the impact of it? But also to educate the business, and then also the suppliers, because we rely then on the external suppliers to provide us with the relevant data. So you saw a lot of efforts between different part of the organizations. So there is where you see there's a lot of more awareness, I think, within the business of all of these different types of charges, you could say, coming our way. Yeah.
And so moving on to the role of the cost of hiring people in circular business models, in production and development. If we taxed labor less, how would that affect the business?
I go back again, is where do we see circularity for us? And that's really in the design arena, because there's where you have a lot of knowledge, a lot of expertise needed in order to come, with new products, but also to move from fossil fuel to renewable energy. So that's very labor intensive. But also on the other side, and that's where we are less involved in, it's more on the retailer side, where we see, hey, when it comes to the repair or the refurbish of the product, it's also labor intensive. So there I do see some benefits in taxing it lower, or lower cost leads to lower employment costs. So that does give, I would say, businesses an extra push, you could say, to go to more circular economy. But what I do see also, and that's maybe something completely different, that once you want to do recycling or wants to do circular, there's a lot of other legislation that you need to be aware of. Because once you label something a waste, it's difficult to get it across the country. And that's also an additional challenge that we need to be aware of. So it's not only a taxation part, but also legally or general, a lot of regulations that we need to be aware of. So sometimes also it's very difficult to, even if you want to recycle, to get the products, that the consumer brings to the store, but how to get it then to the recycling facility or to the manufacturer to refurbish. That's also a very big challenge. Yeah.
So expecting the circular economy to become more mainstream, what do you think will be the effects on the tax function going forward?
I think the tax function is evolving. It makes it also very interesting. I do have to say my job is very interesting because of that. But you do need to I see that you do need to be very close to the business. So you need to understand what's going on, what are the strategy, what is the short-term, long-term plan, to be able to be close there and to advise them also, hey, what's work, what can work and what cannot work, or what do we need to change in our structure. So I think that's very important, to be close to the business and understanding the products. I'm also originally a VAT specialist, so then it's more, okay, I just need to know the value of the product and the ship to, ship from, then I'm done. But now you really need to know a lot more about the product itself, the plastic percentage or the sugar taxes, how much sugar is in it. So there's a lot of more knowledge of the product that you need to be aware of in order to be able to deal with these types of taxes, but also to advise the business from, hey, if you do it this way, these additional charges and therefore additional costs, a price increase will lead to additional price increase. So there's a lot of knowledge sharing, I would say, also close to the business. Yeah.
Interesting. So your role is also evolving. Yeah, a lot.
And that plays a very important role indeed in that.
Yeah. Thanks. Fayez, I'd like to go to you. Which circular business models is SKF developing?
Well, it's quite a number of them. When we look at the different area that SKF is, and also as you mentioned, the friction is one of them. And also we were in COP 30. I don't know which COP we were, but we were there. So, and the circularity was on the agenda. So it's coming very good in discussion here. So the efficiency, the energy efficiency, it's our top priority, where all the new products are really looked into that very carefully. And then also the refurbishment. It's public transport, who are our biggest customer, are very keen in that, and this is also the business model. We see we are growing quite a lot. One of the things which it's really interesting to see that it's the reuse, the lubricant that we have, the oil, we use it in our product. It's 19 million metric ton, which is annually used. It's quite a lot. Where it can save quite per ton, 10,000 liters of reuse, we can save up to the 3,780 CO2 emission. So if we really use that. So we are very much looking into that, which is one of our business unit who is doing the reuse of this clean technology. So this is something which is really helping us also to. Also, they're looking at the 5 to 10 years horizon. SKF is very engaged also to have the factories which is decarbonizing, which is renewable energy is really on the agenda for us. So yes, there are a number of activities which are going, but the circular economy, it's one of our top priority. One thing I would like to say, it's also the bearing is the biggest part is the steel, which we are using 54% of the steel which is coming from the scrapped steel. So it's really where we are very conscious about that.
Thank you. So yeah, I learned also that SKF is applying more services, right? Monitoring the bearings, which allows you to refurbish in time, right? That's also a new business model.
So it's yes, our service engineers really looking into that. This, which is really like the railway business, is main concern about that. So it's really, this monitoring measures are really allowing in a very timely frame, and especially we have also the bearings between 5 meters to 7 meters. So to produce that one, it takes 1 to 2 years. So you need to be really measuring it, knowing what is the life cycle of this bearing. So these measures are helping us and also our customers a lot.
Very interesting. So steel and steel products are really basic necessities for our economies, but there are, of course, supply risks and tariffs that are disrupting the market. SKF's circular business models aim to reduce the need for primary materials. How does the tax mix influence the scaling of those circular business models, do you think?
It's really we had a good discussion also with our group taxation, and when we look at the linear production cost, which is lower than the labor tax, so which is quite interesting to see that we have such a big company, but still our labor taxes, and especially in the Europe, are extremely high. So if we wanted to, and we wanted to be, or we would like to offer this refurbishment or repair business to our customer, but the labor cost is so high. And I think it's one of the area where we need to look into that, where are giving an incentive linked to the circular economy. I'm not saying in general to reduce the taxes, but if we wanted to encourage this kind of business, that is the way to encourage also to, if we give incentives on a payroll taxes, we discussed a lot, it's quite high. But if we are scoping with the circular economy, it can surely give a lot of opportunity for the business to grow.
Right, yeah. So, and where does CBAM, for example, or pricing mechanisms for environmental damage come in? How do you see that working on the business?
Interesting, because it's a CBAM, we have a quite a good dialogue with the European Commission on this one. CBAM is really the raw material is in the scope. But if let's take example of SKF where bearing is not. So if you take the raw material where you are putting the CBAM incentives, but then which is coming outside, but then the bearing not, you are kind of penalizing the European manufacturer, because, and then circular economy will be rather difficult because customers see that it's much less value, or much less expensive to purchase from another country than European manufacturers, which are very expensive due to CBAM, and also the steel, the green energy is quite expensive. So where our re-export is becoming also very expensive product. So yes, so CBAM, it's a really like where we are proposing to the European Commission to look into that, what also Ruth, you mentioned that how we really look into that, the material that which is critical material for where we are not using the word rich enough or we don't have enough to put the less incentive on there, excluding from the CBAM. But let's put the CBAM on the product where we are manufacturing and we are good enough. And we have, and in Europe, we have 38 factories, and which will have a huge impact on the job side. So it's 47,000 people working for SKF. So it's quite a number of jobs this company is creating. So if you really not putting the right scope, and I think we discussed a lot before also that where you are really putting the focus, and if you are really putting the CBAM also on the raw material, which is of course critical, but not on the product made of this, then we are indirectly, it's not a fair, and the competitiveness will be quite different.
It's an interesting point, I think, the request to basically extend the scope of CBAM. Interesting. So thank you very much. Then I'm moving to Benoit. Could you share an example of the challenges your sector is encountering in the shift to more sustainability, and are there any fiscal barriers?
Sure. Probably, one of the main difficulties in the luxury business in general is what you do with your end-life product. So every unsold item which you don't want to sell in outlets, so what do you do with them? You want to recycle them, and we have launched this year what could become a new division or business line, if you want, which will be dedicated to circularity. So basically bringing back all the garment and etc., and try to dismantle them and find a new purpose. Are there any fiscal barrier? I don't know if we will call it barrier because we have already made the decision to go for it. There will be tax risk, there will be tax cost, and tax uncertainty to it because it is a new economy, it is a new thing that we're trying to do, which does not exist. So one of the main hurdles, you were mentioning that if you want to bring back your good, there are no categories. Either it's a finished product or it's a waste. And what we're trying to bring is none of those. It's not a finished product because it's end of life, we don't commercialize it anymore. It's not waste, for God's sake, it's not waste. But there is no category for to be recycled kind of category. And so there is no VAT treatment, there is no, you cannot sell, you cannot price. So it's very difficult to find any box in the current legislation to bring it back. So we had to go with it's not finished, and we have cut it, and we bring it back into a non-sellable shape, and then we actually dismantle and do the rest of the work once it's in our dismantling facility, if you wish. But so a lot of the challenges are around indirect tax, and I think Ruth, you mentioned there was a lot of red, even if you could not read everything, but there was a lot of red in your supply chain. Because discussing with some of the members of the EBTF, indirect tax is linear. There is no way back to the beginning. So finding a way to define what this product is when it's not a finished product anymore, but it will become something new at the end, will probably help to get the ball rolling again into a circular economy. We can discuss about direct tax. Is there any potential risk? I guess the direct tax is not just a direct tax risk, it's just that it's a new business, it's not super profitable. We have not launched that to make money, we have launched that because we believe that in the next 20 years it will be necessary to be there. And maybe you can solve that in a group. More difficult to solve that if you want to do a startup and you have no business prospect. Which raise a number of interesting VAT questions. Can you deduct VAT on anything you do if you don't know what you will sell, etc., etc. So those are all difficult questions to tackle, even if you want to do the right thing. But probably good discussion to have then obviously thought about people tax. Everything you try to create and every innovation generally comes with people. You cannot automate or put AI on things that where you have no data on. So generally, people tax will be a discussion. So those are
absolutely, yeah, very relevant questions you raised. So I was just wondering, since you're an EBTF board member, what is the shared purpose of the members, and what makes businesses join such an initiative?
Well, I think Mai already gave the big picture of what EBTF is. It was created in 2017 in order to bring information into the public tax debate. I guess the idea was to be actor into the public tax debate and of what the role of multinational was, what the contribution of multinational was, and provide data and concrete data to feed the discussion so that you can have a concrete discussion about, okay, now we have a number, 500 billion. We can discuss whether the methodology is right or not, and whether it will evolve or not, or whether there will be an impact on Pillar 2 or not. But at least you have an informed debate over numbers. So I guess the purpose was really to give a voice and also to promote responsible tax practices. So we have published a number of reports on good corporate governance, about transparency, and so. The why join EBTF is probably either you sit on your chair and you wait to see what's going on, but nowadays multinationals are part of the global tax organization. I think I've heard during the discussion that they are global organization, maybe at the level of OECD or NGOs which think globally. So it's probably worthwhile having a discussion and engage into a conversation. And again, there is no point of trying. We're not trying to lobby. We're just trying to give facts so that we can have an informed conversation.
Great. And I think we're having a great conversation today based on those on that report. So which research topics do you think are relevant in the debate around the future of tax? What should we be talking about in the upcoming years?
That's a broad question, which I'm not sure I can address completely. But maybe I'll broaden the discussion a little bit around what has been the purpose of tax policy over the last, I would say, 50 years or plus. Past World War II, even. I mean, the ambition, both from companies and from government, has been to create economic growth. We had baby boom. We had a lot of employees to feed, and we wanted to make sure that we had full employment and economic growth. So the ambition has always been to try to make sure that capital was productive and that we could attract foreign direct capital so that we can create economic growth. Situation has changed for a number of megatrends that we have discussed today, and nowadays the shift have moved a little bit into trying to regulate that globalization and that growth. And we probably come to a stage now where we are in a tipping point where we realize that regulation is maybe hampering growth a little bit. We need to come back and remove some of these regulation. But I have in mind that we have not defined what the next 20 years of tax policy will be and what is it that we want to address in the next 20 years of tax policy. We can discuss on and on about specific issues and what if we repeal the Pillar 2 directive, what if we move CBAM, and then we'll discuss about a lot of technicalities. But we will not solve the question if we don't know where we want to go. I have the impression that or at least I have not found it, but what is the 10-year plan or the 20-year plan for tax policy so that we can align again economy and policy making into trying to do something that will create economic growth. Because all of the discussion we had today is that we need to finance government, but if you want to finance government, you need to tax productivity. If you tax one element, labor too much, or you tax capital too much, you're going to create disparity, and then productivity will go down. That's not what you want. So we need to find a neutral way you need to look at the future, see what will bring productivity in the next 20 years, and that's probably where you need to tax something, but so that it is not impactful but probably we need to redefine the purpose, the common purpose. I mean, it's not just a policymaker, it's not just a multinational, it's not just NGO, and everybody together, we probably need to redefine what we will want for the next 20 years in tax policy.
Music to my ears.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. We have only a few more minutes left, and so maybe, are there any questions you'd like to ask each other or respond to some of the remarks made by other panelists? Yeah, Marie-Louise?
Yeah, so talking a little, I was very intrigued with what you talked about, the steel aspect, and of course, Novo Nordisk, we also expand our capacity, and we are very much looking into, you could say, if we can source green steel. I was wondering, and green steel can of course mean many different things. Is it actually green, or is it just with you could say CO2 neutral energy, renewable energy? I was just wondering if you have looked into anything around green steel or concrete or whatever, something like that.
Well, as bearing is made of steel, it's the critical material, raw material for us. Over green steel, which is mainly coming from the EU right now, and which is also taking the scrap part of this green steel we are using a lot. So that is where we are taking the 54% today. Of course, still, the capacity is still not enough, what we needed. Where also we are double penalized also because now the EU's safeguards measures are coming on the steel, which will be in 2026, 50% of the duties will be impacted. So where the circular economy for us is, and also looking at the geopolitical point of view also, the section 232, which is putting 50% duties on the steel component, I think we don't have a choice. So yes, so we are using a lot this green steel, but it's the capacity in Europe is not fulfilling.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Do you have any other questions? Then I'd just like to say that next year we're going to repeat this event, hopefully even bigger. If there's one topic that you could put on the agenda for this upcoming year in terms of research, but also for the event, what would it be? And I put you on the spot, so please.
So I think, and we have also talked about that in the Plus Us, what should you call it, community or board. This about making sustainability good business. I think that's actually key. Also looking at maybe also the sustainability agenda being a bit under pressure. So how can we make sustainability good business? And I think taxes is a very good driver in that.
Thank you so much. Thijs?
I think circular economy should not be a topic, it should be a habit. So.
Let's make it a habit. Okay, good. Thank you. Benoit?
Maybe we can dig into where tax could have an impact on the circular economy. I mean, we have been talking a lot about behavioral tax and what are the tax barriers on circular economy. So there is certainly an element where tax could play a role to start to get the ball rolling on circular economy. So maybe we can explore that.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, you have to follow up in what Benoit said, because especially looking at VAT also to see what incentives with donations and what the impact is of donations with your VAT deduction, right? I think those are areas where we can have a lot of discussions. And also scrapping, when you cannot do anything else, scrapping is also a tax issue, you could say, in a certain way. Yeah. So I think those elements are important to look into.
Thank you so much. We'll take it along, and thank you so much for your input for today. Thank you all for listening. We're having a short break, and we'll be back with you shortly.
So welcome back, everybody in this room. Welcome back, and also online. Welcome in joining us. And we have the last bit of the symposium together. There'll be a main speaker, then there'll be another panel and a closing speaker, and that will wrap it up. We're so efficient in time that we're 15 minutes ahead of schedule, so that's good sign that we're on message and we're aligned and going forward. On that, I would like to invite the European Investment Bank. This is the largest public financial institution investing in climate finance, larger than the World Bank. People don't realize this. This is really the institution to look at, and I would like to invite the principal advisor, Jonas Byström. Please welcome.
Thank you very much. And hello, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to be with you here today. I will tell a bit about what the European Investment Bank, EIB, is doing with regard to the circular economy and why we are supporting this important development. And I will start with the why. We are the EU bank mandated to support projects that implement EU policy. And EU policy, having focused many years, decades on circular economy, doing this for us as well is very high on our agenda. And we have a number of public policy goals that tell what we should finance, give our priorities. And circular projects are very well aligned with these public policy goals. And we have also decided not only to be the EU bank, but also to be the climate bank. And we have a climate bank roadmap that tells us to provide at least 50% of our financing to green financing, climate action, environmental sustainability, where circular economy is one of the 6 objectives that contribute to this target, which is 50% for this year. And we actually did 57% last year, so doing good progress on that. We've also seen that the uncertain times around us give a good reason to look for projects that can support both competitiveness and increase resource and energy security. And that is what innovative circular projects are doing. So good reasons for us in the EIB to support the circular economy. And as a bank, we are, of course, doing that through financing. And like we heard, we are one of the largest banks, largest multilateral development bank. But when it comes to circular economy financing, the figures are maybe not that impressive. But you can see on the left that they have at least increased. So we're looking at this in 5-year periods. And the first one, 2014 to 2019, we provided 2.5 billion in financing. And this has increased. So the last period, the 2016 to 2020 to 2024, we have almost doubled that to 5.1 billion with financing of about 153 projects, circular projects. And if you look at the chart to the right, we can see what are the sectors, what are the product types we support, mainly industry and services, also quite a lot in bioeconomy and agroforestry, with some shares also in water management, waste management, urban development, and mobility. And if you look at the projects in these different sectors, we have in the past often supported what we can call traditional circular projects, closing loops, recycling, recovery projects. But we can see a lot of potential and increasing number also of circular design, circular production, circular construction projects, new circular business models, product as a service, sharing, leasing solutions, etc. And also reverse logistics, remanufacturing, digital platforms that can help to support this retake, reuse, recycling, and also increasingly in many different sectors, cascading value recovery, feed, food, nutrients, chemicals from biomass, bio-waste, etc., etc. If you look back a bit at the figures to the left, 5.1 billion is quite a lot, I think, when it comes to bank financing and circular economy. But if you compare to our total lending, which last year was 77 billion It's a very small share. And I think that reflects that what we've heard actually today many times. We are talking a lot about the circular economy, but not really doing it on the scale as we would like to do. And that's, in my view, a bit of a concern. For example, considering what was said here in Brussels last year by Janusz Potocznik. He said, the future is circular, or there is no future. Very clear message there. And I think it should remind us that the circular transition is not really anymore a good to have or a nice to have, it's a must have. Considering that we are facing a triple planetary crisis, climate action, biodiversity loss, pollution, where our wasteful lifestyle, overconsumption, and the related material extraction and use is driving this to a large extent. So I think that the case, as we've heard many times today, for the circular transition is clear, and the time to take real action is now. And I think then some of the points raised many times today, leveling the playing field, promoting a green tax change, are things we have again spoken about for even decades. Now we really need to start acting, start doing, and see how this can take us from this a little bit of a niche to, like someone said, the norm going forward. In EIB, we have, in addition to these more policy matters and tax changes, seen that many promoters are struggling to identify and to prepare investment-ready projects. And we've therefore engaged quite a lot in different advisory initiatives. And one is the Circular City Centre, or C3, where we have seen that cities have a very important role in driving the circular economy, but also facilitating, enabling, catalyzing circular action and change. And then we have, together with the European Commission, DGRTD, in the Circular Cities and Regions Initiative, created this C3 initiative where we have advisory programs, also awareness raising, knowledge sharing to promote the circular transition in cities. We're also working in something called Switch to Circular Economy Value Chains, a UNIDO-led initiatives, where the focus is European multinational-led projects here, where we are supporting suppliers in emerging economies, focusing on textiles in Bangladesh, electronics in Egypt, and plastics in Morocco, trying to help these suppliers to become more circular. And from EIB point of view, we are focusing on banks that are in a good need for capacity building to be in a better position to finance these transition for these suppliers to the multinationals. JASPERS, a long-standing initiative with the Commission again, where we are supporting projects that benefit from EU grants, also with regard to circular economy strategies and project pipelines. And then Clean Ocean Initiative, a bit different initiative, focusing on cleaning up the oceans, but we have from EIB started an initiative called the Clean Ocean Project Identification and Preparation Facility, where we in sub-Saharan Africa is identifying and preparing projects that address ocean pollution through circular solution, particularly the plastic pollution. In addition to advisory, we have quite a lot of cooperation with other banks. We have something called the Joint Initiative for Circular Economy, working with a number of national promotional banks, trying to look for ways to, together and individually, do more and do better in the support of the circular economy. And there we have a 16 billion circular economy financing target from the start 2019 to 2025, which we are going to meet. And therefore there is also discussions ongoing on what could be the next level of ambition target and the next stage of this YICE initiative. And then finally, we are working with many larger multilateral development banks, again, to try to share notes and thoughts on how can we better and more support the circular economy. And in that group, there has been prepared a shared vision for the circular economy, and also a report called The Circular Economy in Motion that presents a number of case studies from each of these MDBs. So this shows a bit both that we are trying to do our best in the EIB to support the circular economy transition, but like I argued also, we are very happy to do more. And I think that there are good reasons for all of us to really think of how can we contribute to make this the mainstream, and for us to have figures that gets much higher in our total lending rather than the small kind of single-digit small percentages that we see now. So with this, thank you very much for the attention. Thank you.
No, thank you, Jonas Bistrom, and the EU Bank, the Climate Bank, and to move from niche to need. 77 billion that needs to, the 5.1 billion needs to grow in that percentage, and where you provide finance, advisory, and partnership. So thank you for sharing it. If you believe in it, it's possible, because you only bank into things that you see in the future. So thank you very much. We now move to the panel. This is the last panel, and this is about insights on tax, on circular innovation, and on investments. And the panelists are Joost van Dun from ING Bank, Dennis Beyers of UBC, and Astrid Ladefoget and Marie Goppelroeder from the European Commission. So please join us here on the panel, and of course we've got Femke as moderator. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to introduce the panelists again for you, after which I will again have brief conversations with each of them, and afterwards, if there's time, we can still have some responses to one another. First of all, I wanted to start with Joost van Dun. Joost, since the year 2000, he has held various positions at ING. ING ranks among the largest banks globally, with more than 50 million clients in 40 countries. Joost is currently director at ING's Sustainable Solutions Group and Circular Economy Lead. And in this capacity, he supports ING's large clients in their transition to sustainable and circular business models through loans and investments. Joost is also responsible for driving circular economy in ING's commercial business globally. Very glad to have you. Dennis, on my left here, is head of tax at UCB. UCB is a €6 billion biopharmaceutical group focusing on patients with severe diseases. The company was created in the 1920s and transformed from a chemical company into a biopharma company, with drugs in the fields of neurology, including Parkinson's disease and severe psoriasis, and immunology. Dennis is also board member of Plus Us, which is, like I said, an informal group of tax leaders who believe in driving societal transformation through tax. Astrid, in blue, deputy to the director and head of unit Green Transitions at the Directorate General for Research and Innovation of the European Commission. And Astrid has been at the Commission for more than 21 years in various capacities in DG's Environment, Climate Action, and R&I, heading units on green finance and economic analysis, amongst others. And she was also a member of the cabinet of Commissioner Vella. Then Marie Goppelroeder, she's deputy head of unit, economic analysis, evaluation, and impact assessment support within the direct taxation directorate of DG TaxSud. And before joining DG TaxSud, she held positions as the chief economist team in DG Competition. And prior to that, she worked in economic consulting and at the Dutch Competition Authority. And Marie holds a PhD in economics from the University of Amsterdam. Again, I'd like to start with Joost. How does ING, after listening to the story about EIB, it's particularly interesting to hear your perspective on how ING looks at investing in the circular economy.
Yeah, thank you, Femke. Happy to elaborate on that. So, Yeah, circular economy is for us a fundamental element of our climate approach. And with our climate approach, we want to take a leading position in supporting our clients in their transition to a low carbon economy. And now we do that through different measures. So, for example, we steer our most carbon intensive part of our portfolio, of our loan book, towards net zero goals in 2050 through a science-based approach. But for example, we also engage with our clients on their client transition plan. So we have proactively mapped from all our large corporate clients their client transition plans, assessed that one, and discussed the progress with each client individually also on how they're progressing on their actions as defined in the client transition plan. Now, circular economy is an integral part of our climate approach. We see it as an important mean to reach climate goals, but also to support our clients in their transition to more circular business models and towards a more resource efficient society or economy. What we have learned over the years when financing and investing in circular economy is that we should not only look at our individual clients, but also in the value chain they are active in. Because we see that our clients work together to close the loop on materials or to keep materials longer in the loop. They cannot do it on their own. Everybody holds a piece of the puzzle, so they need to work together. And that's also where we focus on. So we focus on the individual clients, but also on the collaborations we see arising between those parties in the value chain. Now, talking about value chains, we focus on those value chains where resource consumption is high, but also where we see a lot of opportunities for circularity. And of course, where we also have a position as ING in that value chain in servicing clients across the whole value chain. So for us, plastic and packaging is a very important value chain. Also textiles, electronics, batteries, and of course construction, a large consumer of resources. So all in all, so we support our clients in our individual clients in their transition, but we also look at initiatives, joint initiatives between players in the value chain to scale certain new technologies, new circular technologies, new circular business models, like, for example, development of new collection, sorting, or recycling technologies.
Okay, so that's interesting. So do you maybe have an example of that, how that works, and how far in the supply chain do you go? I mean, is this a global perspective, or is it usually in Europe?
Yeah, so so we have a global reach. So we're active in more than 40 countries. But for circular economy, we see those investments, and I also give a concrete example is, for example, our involvement in financing new advanced recycling plants. That's predominantly in the EU and in the US. But it's, I think, an interesting example. So advanced chemical recycling, it's a new circular technology which allows that more different, hard to recycle types of plastics can be recycled through a chemical process, and then the plastic waste is then converted back to its original molecules and transferred into a kind of oil, and that oil can then be used to produce new plastic products, but they're not based on crude oil, but based on the converted plastic waste. Now, that's a relatively new technology, and when we finance those technologies, we look at it from what's the technology applied to make this happen? Is it scalable? Is it already mature? We look at the feedstock, so what goes in, and we look also, of course, at the output, the offtake. So who is going to buy those materials? And there, it's already often mentioned today, it's the level playing field. And there we see also the challenges and the difficulties with financing these initiatives, because we see that the output of these recycling plants producing secondary materials, they are more expensive to produce, because you need to close the loop on materials, you set up partnerships, you need to collect, sort, and then recycle, so a lot of steps. And on the other hand, we also see that they are competing with relative cheap virgin products in which the negative environmental externalities are not priced in correctly. So those cheap virgin products look cheaper than they actually are, but they're also competing with the secondary materials. And when we finance these initiatives, and of course also the recycling tent themselves, they would like to have long offtake agreements because then you have a steady, predictable cash flow because your materials will be bought. And that's what's now the challenge in financing this is that the competition between the secondary and the virgin materials leads to a market which is not stable. So also on the offtake side, it's not a given that there are long offtake agreements for those secondary materials, and that makes it harder to finance it.
It increases the risk
of the investment. It increases the risk, exactly, and that hinders a little bit the financing. And to make the link then to regulation and taxation, so regulation will definitely help in creating demand for secondary materials. If something becomes mandatory, everybody needs to comply with it. And taxing can help in making the price difference between the two cheap virgin materials and the secondary materials more balanced, hopefully.
Which makes it easier to invest in these kinds of business models.
Because the business case becomes more healthier.
Interesting. So ING is also part of the Circular Economy Working Group, combining financial institutions as well as regional bodies and national ministries in the Netherlands. So why and how are these parties collaborating on the topic of circular finance?
That's a good question. So the government, Jaime knows better, wants to become fully circular by 2050. So that's an important goal set by the Dutch government. And they do that to address important topics like climate change, pollution, but also to create a robust, innovative economy, which is also resilient and also taking care of ensuring the critical raw materials. Now, to realize that, as we all work together in the value chain, that also applies to the Dutch government. So they also need to work together with the regional bodies like the provinces, the municipalities, but also with industry players and also with the banks, as we also have a role to play in financing the transition. And that is where we come together. So as we just discussed, we see some challenges in financing or investing in circular business models. And this working group is focusing on solving the challenges or the bottlenecks we see in financing. And that's where the working group and the Dutch government work together. Key is here to address circularity in a proper way in the finance and in the investment decisions, so that it is well reflected and well understood. And an example, for example, is the drafting of finance guidelines in which we can define, identify and select and categorize and also report on circular transactions. And that's also what we do. And of course, we also learn by doing, by financing circular initiatives. And this working group works together in different sub-working groups, but once a year progress is discussed with the banks and the government, and with the banks also on board level, so quite high, to discuss progress and to see what's needed to where if there's additional steering or additional action needed to solve those bottlenecks.
Really interesting initiative, I think. So with the Dutch Banking Association, ING has also signed a statement calling for the Dutch government to work on a fair playing field for circular business models, both nationally and in the EU, and on shifting the tax burden from labor to resources. So why do the banks want to advance knowledge on the tax shift?
Because it's very important. But without kidding. So indeed, we have signed a statement, and in the statement, as I just mentioned, the banks and the government work together, and in that statement it's made clear what do the government ask banks and what do the banks ask from the government to jointly work on these challenges. Now, and one of the challenges, one of the asks of the government is for us, for the banks, to assess and to include circularity in a proper way in our finance and investment decisions or in our credit approvals. And on the other hand, what we ask from the government is to help creating, amongst other things, but also that level playing field. As we've just discussed, it can be challenging to finance circular business models in the transition to more circularity. So therefore, it's important to create a level playing field, which is so much needed because we need to do so much investments and financings in new circular business models. We need to develop alternative materials. We need to scale reuse and repair models. We need to scale collection, sorting, new recycling technologies, new recycling capacity. So there's a lot to be done. And to advance that, we think it's also needed to create a more level playing field. And we think the measures proposed by the XTAX project really contribute to achieving that level playing field. And therefore, it's important for us, but also for society as a whole.
Great. Again, music to my ears, of course. Then I'm moving to Dennis. Sorry, that came as a shock. So Dennis, you're a strong advocate for tax and sustainability. Why are you so passionate about tax, the role of tax in addressing societal issues?
So you're going really to the essence of really myself. No, I think this is a thing I've already been working on for quite a long time. And I think for me it's about 3 C's, just to make sure that I can make it comprehensible and perhaps somebody takes this away with him or her. But it's really about caring, it's about curiosity, and it's about capacity. So here is really where sustainability and tax links. The caring part I think is pretty clear. We're really caring about leaving the world a little bit better than we, let's say, entered it. And I think, let's say, the current climate where polarization is taking place is not really helping or bringing any, let's say, bright future. Climate is also not going to get away, so I think the caring part is definitely the inspiration. I think the curiosity part, there comes my tax knowledge in. When looking at a pharmaceutical or any innovative value chain, you are looking to a very strong backbone of value, and that value is IP and research and development. And all the other functions like manufacturing, for instance, distribution and your supply chain are routine type of activities with almost zero value. Whereas if you're trying to link that to sustainability, it's exactly the opposite. All the issues or, let's say, external, let's say, resources you're calling upon are, let's say, exactly in these routine functions where there should be no value. So whenever there would be a correction, it would be a quite brutal disruption of the tax models we are knowing. And then I prefer to be part of the thinking process and of the solution than just at a certain point in time be confronted with a radical change that the world decides for us. And then the third part is capacity. I think that the only, let's say, way in which we will, well, no, not the only, but I think mindset is the first one, but I think the only, let's say, global system which has worked thus far is a tax system. If somebody would have asked me a couple of years ago, will ever 140 companies in countries in the world agree on implementing a minimum tax of 15%, I would have said, you're crazy. What happened? It worked out. Okay, we see now some disruption with the US. Let's see whether that disruption is temporary or permanent. We don't know yet. But on the other hand, they got to a solution. Whereas we see that all the climate panels, they're very difficult to get to decisions. But it's very simple. The tax system raises money. At a certain point in time, you will need to raise revenue in order to, let's say, fight some of the challenges. And so then, indeed, your tax system will be, let's say, part of the answer. And so that are the 3 C's that are driving me here.
Very clear. Thank you so much. So I looked at the UCB website and it states, we understand the intrinsic link between the health of the planet that we call home and the health of the humans who live on it. I love that sentence. And it brings home immediately, you know, the connection between sustainability and health. And I was just wondering, could you explain a little bit more on how UCB is working towards sustainability and circular business models?
Yeah. So for those of you that have not looked on our website, there is indeed a very nice, let's say, circle with all the values that UCB is trying to embody. And I think there are 3 items at the core. I'm simplifying. There's innovation, there's the patient, and there's sustainability. So there are the 3 elements which are at the core. And of course, we are working in a very regulated environment. So we know there are limitations. On one hand, it's easier than what Joost comes to tell me, because your clients, for them, everything is possible. For us, not everything is possible. But we, unfortunately, need to find solutions in a very limited playing field. So, of course, that forces us to be highly creative. And I think the way we're looking at this, so for every product that UCB currently has on the market, but also for every future product that will come onto the market, there is a green scorecard. And that scorecard gives away, scores, in fact, the performance of all UCB products from design to development to production and distribution. So it's really I think the fancy word is a cradle-to-grave analysis, but it's really looking to the full circular life of our products. And then that touches on carbon emission, that touches on water, that touches on use of solvents, that touches on the way we are distributing things. And then, of course, then we are knowing it. But then, of course, you need to do something with it. And then every year, we go together with the sustainability teams and all the product teams, we go through an exercise. And for every product, we set goals, sustainability goals. That can be about less use of raw materials, relooking into the packaging, relooking into, let's say, the use of water upon production, the way we are distributing things, as we have a lot of products that need to have, let's say, cold chains, so sometimes up to minus 50 or 70 degrees. We try to see how far can we stretch the temperature without bringing a patient in danger. That's, of course, always the limit, and that will always be, let's say, a no-go zone. So, and with these type of things, everybody gets then their KPIs. And then just perhaps to share some of the examples just to make it concrete. So Cimzia is I think there are roughly between 120 and 150k patients on Cimzia, which is a drug against Crohn's disease, arthritis, axial spondyloarthritis, where we, for instance, last year succeeded in bringing down the amount of plastic in the packaging with 48% and the weight of the boxes with 65%. Counting that out to 150,000 patients per year, you're really speaking about big volumes. Same thing for Neupro. Neupro is is a drug that counters the effects of Parkinson's disease, where we're really able to also decrease the size and weight of all the boxes with 65%, and to go for fully recycled, which is not, from a regulatory perspective, always possible. So it are these type of things where we are indeed trying to make the difference. And yeah, that's always the balance between indeed the regulatory, let's say, framework versus what we want to contribute, but I think we always find a balance to get to meaningful results.
Thank you. So just before, you seem to imply that the value created in the factories and the value created in the IP was some kind of zero-sum game, that if one grows, the other becomes smaller. Maybe I misunderstood, but since you can tell me exactly what you meant, but developing new medicines is highly R&D intensive, as you said. So what if we could shift to a model where hiring people, the brains to develop these new medications would be easier as a business case, whereas pricing, pollution, and resources would change the business in terms of the production and manufacturing. How would you see, let's say, the role of people and the cost of hiring people in that equation?
Well, if it was only about the cost of people, it would be easy, but I'm going to come back to your first point because this is super important. So indeed, the entire value crystallizes in what we call in tax land the DEMPI functions. That's really how you measure the value of IP and, let's say, innovative functions for tax purposes. And so that value is, for the moment, is an absolute number. But of course, it's that absolute number where the maximum value will crystallize that will need to be redistributed to part where you're indeed, let's say, using natural resources to a more large extent than actually in your R&D and IP function. So there again, we will see a rebalancing to a certain extent. The funny thing is, how will that happen? And will that be really a communicating vessel, or will there just be a distortion, and will there be at a certain point in time a form of double tax? In an ideal world, not. But can that happen? Yes. Now, of course, and that's true, part of the reason why the value of that, let's say, IP backbone is so strong is about the people. If you look to the cost price of the development of a drug, but it also goes for other innovative industries, I think definitely in your research phase, somewhat less in your development phase, your people cost of having very highly skilled researchers and people working in your labs is your most determining cost throughout, let's say, a very big part of your research function. And so if indeed we would be seeing a shift between, let's say, salary or, let's say, people taxes, if I'm going back to the framework from the beginning of the day, towards a more sustainability type based on tax system, that would really help. Because what are we seeing now? You could also use that to recalibrate the entire system. For the moment, governments are, and there is economic studies behind, compensating part of your very high research and development costs, where people is your biggest cost, with R&D incentives. But I think that may likely be less required the moment you indeed would bring down substantially your people costs. And of course, if then indeed there are companies behaving well from a sustainability perspective, your net profitability goes up and you have more funds to invest in R&D. So this can be the beginning, again, the beginning of a very beautiful story, but there are a lot of ifs to that one. And that's again where the curiosity comes in. I hope there are smart people that would indeed see the entire system and how it interferes with each other.
Thank you so much. Astrid, again to you. Could you tell us a little bit about how your unit operates?
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for inviting me. So my unit is called the Green Transition Unit in DD Research and Innovation. As you can imagine, that's a rather broad title. What I could maybe explain it with is, if you look a little bit at what we have been discussing today, there's a triple planetary crisis. It's about pollution, it's about climate change, it's about biodiversity loss, and all of this is further exacerbated because of unsustainable resource use. So we have many policies that are tackling that. In my unit, what we're dealing with is the research and innovation budget that the EU has. So for this area, it's around 9 billion over the EU budget, which is 7 years. So in my team, we aim to program that and look what should we finance. We're trying to follow what are the solutions we're looking for. We're in close contact also, for example, with the private sector. It was mentioned chemical recycling. We look what are the specific issues that maybe merit public support to try to get those technologies quicker on the market.
And so how does DG Research and Innovation support the circular transition specifically?
Yeah, so circular economy is a thematic topic within my team. But of course, as has already been mentioned, circular economy is very vast, right? I mean, we're talking about everything from product design, how will the product be used, produced, dismantled, and so on. So my team looks specifically at how to combine research across different parts. So other units in RTD, for example, would be focusing on let's help the pharmaceutical industry in Europe become more circular. What are the things that they need for that? And then they would be cooperating on that. But then we need somebody to look across. So then we would be looking at how could we combine that, for example, in industrial symbiosis with other industries? Are there interesting technologies that are developed within a given sector that could be relevant across sectors? And this kind of things. Equally, we look a lot at societal transformation because one thing is the industries, another thing is consumers, citizens, and of course also public authorities. So we look a lot at this interplay.
Yeah, so already we heard ING looking in the supply chain perspective, and you're looking at cross-sectoral or cross-supply chain products that can maybe support other sectors. So just to be clear, the circular economy is a major challenge, and it's a goal for 2050, but we really have to work on it to make it to. It's so big. It's such a major transition. And I'm glad to hear that you're involved in all those aspects. So could you explain to the audience what is Horizon 2020 and which part of that program is circular economy focused?
Yeah, so Horizon Europe is a major research program we have for the EU. And in a way, when you look at what is being done by DG Research and Innovation, it goes really across what we call the whole innovation journey. So you start from funding in what is called Pillar 1, on very basic research in some cases, really fundamental research that needs to be financed, new ideas and so on, often things very far from the market. Then you move to Pillar 2, which is the part that I have a chunk of, that we are working on, which is really in this interface between research and innovation, where you're starting to bring some of these ideas, solutions or technologies closer to the market. And then you have Pillar 3, which is the European Innovation Council, which is really in many cases beginning to enter into the market in terms of financing startups, new business models and so on. The circular economy you will find across the whole program, also because the definition is quite broad. So it's not, I don't think it would be beneficial to have one limited box. What you will see in many cases is that, for example, a lot of research is happening on trying to find alternatives for some of the chemicals that we need in batteries. And that also have a circularity dimension, but it's maybe not the only dimension. So you can't just press one button and then see what is all circular, but we are looking and data mining in terms of seeing where the projects that are really relevant to accelerate the circular economy. We are investing a lot in the recycling part, of course, but we are also investing much more than we did in the past on design, in the design phase. Because in some cases, innovation we might be able to design ourselves out of not needing the recycling part. So these are some of the trends I think that are to be watched.
Well, it's comforting to know that, and it's indeed a good perspective to say that it's not maybe a separate work stream, but it's ingrained in all those areas. Yeah, that's very good. So the Draghi report has mentioned the polluter pays principle and the need also to reduce the tax burden for workers for a competitive economy. So do you think DGRTD could in future, in one way or another, support studies on the role of tax in driving circular business model innovation? And I'm saying this because it's also a kind of fundamental research.
Yeah. I mean, there are many things that will be supported in the future, and I'm quite certain that circularity is also a topic as such that will stay with us. But I think, again, it's important to look at the things from a very systemic perspective. What we, for example, do, which is linked to also what the European Investment Bank mentioned, is that we think there is a lot of research and studies already on environmental taxation, but it's not necessarily happening. So what we also want to do sometimes is really test and try with some of the players, and we do that particularly in the cities and regions level. So we have something called the Circular Cities and Regions Initiative, where we're really bringing together interested front-runner cities, sometimes with cities that are less front-runners, but who really want to learn from each other. And then we are offering a multitude of instruments. So you can come to that fora, whether you're just looking for information as a company and you're looking to understand what's happening in some of the cities, whether you're looking for networking and we have communities of practice in many different topics, or if you're beginning to look more towards the market. And that comes back to what we keep coming back to, is we can develop a lot of nice research and innovation projects and come up with new circular business models, but then what happens? Do they actually get picked up in the market and accelerated? And there it's very clear that we've seen that that doesn't always happen. So sometimes it needs this extra push by public money. So at the Circular Cities and Regions Initiative, we have this very close cooperation both with the European Investment Bank, as Jonas mentioned, the 3C mechanism that can really offer help in terms of structuring of financial advice and so on. We are also working a lot with the OECD that has done a number of city scans where they have really looked at what are some of the barriers that are hampering a particular city. And in many cases, we come back to the thing again and again, are externalities and incentive structures really set at the right level? And are there some quick wins that some cities could maybe learn from others? So we're offering that.
Yeah, so it's coming back in a lot of studies. It's a bit of a catch-22, right? If a lot of parties come to the conclusion that the incentives need to change, but nobody's in charge of those or nobody is really doing that, it's a bit of a catch-22. But I'm glad to hear that the topic of circularity is, of course, ingrained in all the work that you do. Wonderful. Marie, let's move to you. Could you tell us a little bit more about the role of your unit?
Sure. First of all, thanks a lot for having me. It's a very nice conference, so I'm very happy to be here today. Yeah, maybe a few words on my unit. So basically, we're at the intersection of, economic analysis at the one hand and policy making. So we're trying to build economic analysis that can then feed into policy initiatives in the field of direct taxation. That's basically what my team is doing. It's mainly consisting of economists. And I mean, the focus really lies on the assessment of the efficiency and fairness of tax systems in the EU. So my unit provides basically quantitative and qualitative economic assessment that then can feed into all the work that we're doing in terms of direct taxation in the Commission. Another important work stream we have, and that's at the heart of our unit, is the basically everything that comes from taxation that can feed into the economic governance framework at the Commission, so the European semester, where we then provide information that then feed into the so-called country-specific recommendations that come out every spring, where we give member states recommendations regarding tax policies, what they could do. And it's a very important tool because we're facing unanimity, of course, as you know. And so these sorts of soft policy tools are very important. And we have also made in the past quite a lot of headways when it comes to tax avoidance and tax evasions, where we brought a lot of recommendations in the past years. And another thing I think is important to mention in terms of our work, we're organizing every year the high-level political forum, the Tax Symposium, where we're also a speaker, Femke. And lastly, we have the annual report of taxation. It's a flagship report that comes out every year in June, where it's like an economic indicator assessment that we've been doing for the past 10 years or so. And one of the main analysis blocks is always a look at the tax mix. How has that evolved or not evolved? Has it been steady or not? We also assess tax policies at the member state level. How have they changed over the years? As an overview that's in every edition. And then in past editions, we also looked at the megatrends, or we focused on environmental taxation that's then changing every year. And we also have a new report, a new flagship report, and Gerasimus already alluded to it earlier in the first part of the conference, which is the Gap report that will come out very soon in 2-3 weeks, where we look at to what extent can member states close their tax gaps, because every year we have 100 billion euro left on the table by member states because we are not efficient enough in revenue, in basically collecting tax revenue. So it's very important to measure tax gaps and then to see what are the drivers of those gaps in order to close them, because we're already playing in a field where tax rates are very high, so there's very little scope of increasing. So we really have to look and go back to the basics and become better in the collection part. So that's what the unit mainly does.
Yeah, interesting. So could you elaborate on what trends you have observed in the tax mix?
Sure. So looking back maybe in the main findings of the past annual report of taxation, I mean, what we see is that the tax mix over the years, over many years, even decades, has been very stable. We see that the main source of revenue of taxes collected has always been labor taxation, and a large chunk of it is social security contributions. So there we're talking about 51%. Then the second biggest chunk is consumption taxes, around 27%, and lastly, it's on capital taxation, which is around 21%. And that, as I said, has not changed significantly over the years. What we also see is that when we zoom into tax types, is that environmental taxation has remained low and has actually decreased. So that's maybe is a basic thing. I think the tax burden overall in 2023 is 39%. It has gone down a little bit from 2021 by 1 percentage point. And interestingly, when you zoom into the drivers of this decrease is a combination of factors. On the one hand, there is less revenue collected from environmental taxation. So the highest was around 2016, where it was about 2.7%, which is already not super large, but okay. And this has decreased to now at about 2%. And also revenues collected from property taxation, so capital taxes, has decreased, and that's the main drivers, together with the increase in nominal GDP, and that led to the decrease in the tax to GDP ratio. So that's one thing we see, and of course it's a bit paradoxical if you think, and also recalling the megatrends that were discussed earlier, that you do see an aging population. So that means that the labor tax base will erode. So the very strong reliance on labor taxes that continues to be the case and is very persistent is an issue. And as of course that's further exacerbated by the fact that you will have to raise money to pay for pensions, because we have an aging society. There will be more costs for health, for care services. So this has to be financed. And of course, we also want to go to a green and circular economy, and there it's very paradoxical that we see this low and further decreasing revenue base there.
So, what has the EU or DG Taxud done in the past to foster a more future-proof tax mix? I mean, there's a lot of policy already, so maybe you want to explain a little bit.
So I'm not going to go so much into CBAM, but maybe look at a little bit other things we have not discussed so much so far. So one thing is, of course, doing the intelligence building, which we've been doing, for instance, with the annual report of taxation, so to have a good basis of information, and that is, sound to build on further initiatives. The other bit is the European semester, where over many years we had CSR, so these country-specific recommendations for a number of countries to shift away from labor taxation to more sustainable sources of taxation. Among those, of course, also environmental, but also more capital taxes. There we have been promoting also property taxation. And so, for instance, this year in 2025, there were 7 member states that got a recommendation on that. But there are also 3 other member states that got a recommendation to broaden the tax base also towards more growth-friendly sources, so that could be put in the basket. So this is something we're putting on an annual basis. And of course, we have now, with Next Generation EU or the RRF facility, we have more of a lever to push these, because of course, you, as a member state, you only get the money when you finalize the reforms. So that of course helps. So that's one thing we have been doing. Then also in the context of the semester, there's been more of a focus on phasing out environmental harmful fossil fuel subsidies. There's a bit of the added complication that these are forms of tax expenditures, and every country has a different means of quantifying them, has a different method, so it's not always obvious to compare it, because the numbers cannot be fully compared, and we have a lot of discussions also in the Commission across different services on how to harmonize and how to properly benchmark in such a way that we can compare numbers. But there's also other work that has been ongoing in that field, and also very importantly, when you look at the production side or the supply side, we had this year coming out the Clean Industrial Deal communication in February, and then the recommendations on the tax incentives in July, where we encourage member states to use tax incentives to foster clean investment in order to reach the EU climate target, and where we also, in that recommendation, give further guidelines on how effective and efficient tax incentives can look like.
You're actively involved in the tax aspects of those acts, the Circular Economy Act, a Clean Industrial Deal, for example. Are you involved in that?
So our unit is involved in the was at the heart of the Clean Industrial Deal recommendation.
Looking forward to it. And so maybe looking into the future a little bit more from the perspective of the Commission. Of course, there are limitations to what TaxUD can do, but is there anything you can say about what moving forward, what the Commission could be doing on the tax mix of the future?
Sure. So I mean, the work on the semester, I think that's set to continue, and we're further, supporting member states in that transition via the recommendations. I think there's also further work ongoing in order to see how to further green the European semester, and there's a study ongoing, I think, that's led by DG Environment that will come out. And there's also more foundational work in DG Tax at the moment, but it's a study that's ongoing that will come out in the course of next year, where we look a little bit more in an explorative way, more experimental way, to see how it is, whether and to what extent it's feasible to price in more the environmental harmful effects of goods and also of services. Where we basically, for one part of the study will be a mapping of what's already out there in terms of existing market-based policy instruments and how effective and efficient they were. And also then the second part of the study will look more into how a hypothetical tax structure can be built to fill in gaps where the polluter pays principle is not fully internalized at this stage. That's something else. And then coming back to what I mentioned earlier, that we need to look in, rather than trying to see whether we can increase rates, because I think if you look at EU average in terms of tax burden and compare it to the OECD average, we're still much higher than that. So I don't think there's much scope to increase rates if you don't want to kind of stifle growth and investment. And of course, that's crucial at this stage at the EU. So really go back to the basics and look how efficient we are to collect revenues, tax revenues. And there, as I said, we have this forthcoming Mind the Gap report, and knowing that we leave a lot of money at the table every year as the union or in each member state, it's important to do some diagnostics to look at, how much money do we leave at the table. Do member states measure the gaps? So there are a number of member states, including the Netherlands and the Nordics, that are more active in this field, but others still need to catch up, because you need to know how much money you leave on the table in order to then see, how can you reduce that gap, and what are the drivers? Where is the money siphoning from? Is it because taxpayers make mistakes when they file tax returns? Is it caused by tax evasion or avoidance or other forms of non-compliance? So this is one part of it. And we also look at how member states can become more efficient in the collection of taxes in terms of tax recovery, for instance. Also cooperation between tax administrations, information sharing, that's also important if you want to curb tax evasion and avoidance. And lastly, and I think that's also a very important part of the equation, is to look at, to what extent member states look at the capacity in building in terms of digitalization, rollout of AI, because that is also a very important factor to basically not leave money on the table, because you're more effective in collecting those taxes. And currently there's not such a member state by member state overview, and I think with that report, I think we're filling a gap in terms of assessment on these factors.
Maybe just a final question, because Gerard Jones-Thomas earlier today stated that labor taxes and the large share of labor taxes in the tax mix is not sustainable. is there anything the Commission can do? I mean, it's not it's a national capacity, of course, labor taxes, but can the Commission somehow support the dialogue or the exchange of experiences in different countries, maybe on also incentives on labor tax reductions for innovative activities, for example, or circular activities? So there's a lot of ideas as to how labor taxes can be reduced. And I was just wondering, because Erasmus Thomas mentioned it, whether there is already something in place to look at that from the Commission point of view, or if it's maybe a new field that could be added in future.
I think it's fair to say that we need to have more discussion within the Commission, also within TaxUD, but also with external stakeholders of what can be done. I mean, the initiatives I mentioned in the projects, I think they're already going into that field. It's also in that mind, the GAP report, the idea is to have that as a springboard to have discussion also among member states at the high political forum, how to, to learn from each other, to learn, have best practices, and I think that's one part of the equation. And I think there needs to be also more research in that area in order to make that transition possible. And also, of course, we have also a number of implementing dialogues across policy initiatives where we engage with, and Commissioner Hoekstra engages with businesses, for instance, to see where the gaps are that can be filled.
Thank you so much. I think we've covered a lot of ground, and we're almost at the end of our program. I want to thank our magnificent panel, and thank you so much.
So indeed, we're moving to the end, but it's not totally the end. We have one last speaker, and that's the founder of Plus Us, Wim Wuits, and he'll be addressing us to close up. He's also one of the co-hosts, and he's a visionary global executive on systemic thinking and inclusive future. So please join us.
Thank you. Just a quick wrap up from my end. Plus Us has been dropped a few times, and a lot of Plus Us members were at the panel. For sure Femke, for sure Benoit from Chanel, Marie-Louise, Novo Nordisk, Dennis in the last panel from UCB. And Plus Us started about 3 years ago. 3 years ago I was here in Brussels with Karel Berlin. Many of you may know Karel. Karel was the Vice President, Head of Tax of Ørsted, moved now to Corrit, is their tax partner. But back then he was Head of Tax of Ørsted. And we wanted to create a movement, for the lack of another word, and we wanted to bring together thought tax leaders in Europe. Leaders who had proven that they wanted to move the needle in the field of leadership and sustainability. And we started reaching out one by one the community in Europe. 30 minutes teams that we had to explain, and the label that I used back then when we were on those calls is we want to create a Davos of tax. It was a bit maybe overly ambition, and certainly for sustainability we should not go to Davos, but we should go to other places. But from there, a group of 60, 70 tax leaders united. We come together 2-3 times a year. We were at the headquarters of Lego, we were at the headquarters of Ørsted, we were at the headquarters of UCB, and we also organized 3 summits, 2 times in London and once in Amsterdam, together with also KPMG in Amsterdam, in the Koepelkerk, the really nice place in Amsterdam, to reflect and inspire. I think those are the 2 magic words. We don't want to do policy, we don't want to do lobbying, but we just want to inspire and keep the fire going. And we had a meeting this morning with, well, we call it the board, but we are even not an organization. We don't have a legal entity. We don't have anything, but we call it like I would say the ones that really want to move the needle, a group of 10, 15 out of the 70, to reflect, to inspire. And one of the conclusions this morning was, if not us, who else? I mean, if you compare over a period of 3 years, it has been, yeah, I don't need to explain it here. I mean, it has been 1,000 times more complex than it was 3 years ago. So if not us, if not the community of X-Tax, if not the community that is sitting here, who will do it? We will keep the fire burning. And certainly with Plus Us, that's our goal. We still want to add more members who can be member. Well, we have. Do we have a slide on this or not? Well, there was yeah, okay, it's the old slide, Veronica. So, but that's okay. So we had I would say a visioning workshop 2-3 years ago with Sachi and Sachi. They helped us on a logo. They helped us on a tagline, driving societal transformation through taxation. But we also listed values. And with Peter this morning, Peter said us this morning, it's actually the values that drive this group rather than tax. And that's the reality. If we would have been a group of engineers, we could do exactly the same, moving the needle in the field of sustainability, but from an engineering point of view. So we, by accident, at least me, by accident, I arrived in tax, and I'm there now for almost 30 years, I would say. But that's I think, what's unites us all, and from there we can make change. So everyone who fits, and I don't think we have the values listed there, but it's about kindness, that is an important one. It's about the disruption. We want to really move it but in a kind way. So that's what it is. I translated it in my words. It's people who are driven by tax, driven by sustainability, driven by leadership, and I should be able to have a cup of coffee or a beer in the evening with them and have a normal conversation about life in general. So that's a bit right, Dennis. So we also need to have some philosophical discussions on outside of our field of tax and sustainability. So that's Plus Us. If you want to join, if you want to move the needle, yeah, reach out to me, Femke, Dennis, Marie-Louise, Veronica as well. Who else do we have here? Benoit, yeah, so all of us. And we just want to grow the group. We want to inspire each other and keep the fire burning. Because again, if not us, who else? So here I close it.
Kind disruption. Maybe that's the closing for this session going forwards. We had very valuable insights. We had very high-level speakers. Congratulations to all those that have been organizing this. And people have been engaging because of the climate issue, environmental issue, the economic issue, health issue, security issue, you name it, whatever perspective you want to take, it's all included here. There's a QR code that you can look on and see to get all the documents and to get engaged. And on behalf of EBTF Plus Us and X-Tax Project, thank you panelists, thank you audience also online for joining us. And next year we'll meet again. I won't be there as a climate envoy, maybe as director of the OECD Environment, I'll be there. So one form or another, I'll get engaged going forward. And if I look, you know, you just said kindness, kind disruption. When I'm in climate summits, very often they take these very big humanity sort of slogans. Actually, the G20, it was Ubuntu, I am because you are. And that is something between peoples to move beyond your differences. But it's also between persons and nature. I think we are because it is, and it is because we are, and we need to move forward. In the Emirates, it was Majlis, which means in the desert, the elders come together around the fire, they warm each other, and then they talk from the heart and they speak truth. So that's something we've done today. In Belém, it was in Brazil, the climate summit. It was Mutirão, which means shoulder to shoulder, and we resolve issues together, not because we have to, but because we want to. So I think we've all done that now, and at the end, all these feelings bring us to team humanity, to find a solution. And all these feelings are not linear or transactional, about winning or losing. It's all about relationships, so it's all circular. So thank you very much, and until next year. Bye-bye.